Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 141-150. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 141, You wouldn't want me to be laughed at, would you? Ah, wait a moment. Under Susie's pitiful gaze, Audrey exclaimed and ran out of the room in the blink of an eye. When she returned shortly after, she was holding a pile of clothes and instructed, "Susie, close the door." Susie stared at Audrey with resentment, but still obediently extended her hind leg to close the door. She watched the young lady place the dresses she was holding on the sofa and then casually grab a little loli beside her, beginning to help her get dressed with sparkling eyes. The little loli who was grabbed didn't resist either, docilely letting Audrey dress her like a doll. Audrey explained while moving her hands up and down. "Well, these are my clothes from when I was little, only worn once, at the New Year's Eve banquet in previous years." "Ah, right." Audrey's thoughts suddenly wandered, and her expression became somewhat serious. "Ember, you also need to prepare a formal suit." "Why?" Ember looked down at his clothes and asked in confusion, "Can't I wear these clothes?" Audrey straightened her small face and said seriously, "It's certainly fine for everyday wear, but no noble would wear the same outfit twice at a formal occasion. That would definitely make people suspect if your family is facing a financial crisis, which would be bad enough, but even worse, it might be seen as disrespect towards the host of the gathering." Audrey repeated the lecture she had received from her personal maid Annie with a straight face, adding at the end, "Berlin has complained to me several times because you wear the same clothes every time you attend a gathering. He even specifically asked if you had any issues with him. This made him feel down for quite a while, which is why he never dared to actively seek you out to purchase potion formulas." "Huh?" Ember asked back in confusion, "Doesn't Furs wear the same clothes too?" "It's the beige one every time. It's different." Audrey explained seriously, "Miss Furs simply likes beige, but the lace decorations on her clothes are different. For example, the first time she wore a long dress with a ruffled stand-up collar, the second time was a court-style long dress, the third." "Stop." Ember interrupted Audrey's chatter and said calmly, "Then I'm the same." Audrey looked at him suspiciously, "Are there any changes in the style of your clothes?" Ember argued with a calm expression. "No, I just prepared many identical sets of clothes. They look exactly the same in style, but each day it's a brand new set." Audrey rolled her eyes at him, knowing without a doubt that Ember was completely making things up. Would anyone really prepare many identical sets of clothes? No way, right? Audrey's attitude was exceptionally firm, and she refused to back down. "If it's Grillint's gathering, I don't have much of an opinion, but for the New Year's Eve banquet, you absolutely must wear a new formal suit." "All right then." Ember clicked his tongue and said casually, "I'll go buy a set in a couple of days." "No." Audrey raised her fair index finger and said seriously, "Formal suits for official occasions must be custom-made, because many of the clothes sold in stores have the same styles, and many middle-class people wear such clothes. If you wear such clothes to the New Year's Eve banquet, you will definitely be looked down upon." She paused, as if feeling that Ember wasn't afraid of this, and added, "And I, who will be accompanying you, will also be affected by you. You wouldn't want me to be laughed at because of you, would you?" "All right then." Ember shrugged, "Then I'll find someone to custom make a set in a couple of days." "No need." Audrey blinked and said with a smile. "The Hall family has several tailors. For example, Mrs. Genia has been designing formal dresses for me and Mom since I was very young. The dress I'm wearing now was designed by Mrs. Genia for my 17th birthday. Dad and my brothers each have a tailor. After all, they are the Hall family's public face, and their appearance is very important. Well, Dad and Hilbert's tailors are for their own use, but Alfred is not in Backland right now, so you can use his tailor." Ember rubbed his chin and asked thoughtfully, "Is it like this for every noble?" "Of course." Audrey said seriously, "For any noble, face is extremely important. If a noble wears the same piece of clothing multiple times at various banquets, it can only mean that this noble disrespects the host of the banquet and is on the verge of bankruptcy. This will not only severely affect the noble's face and reputation but also influence how other nobles judge him. If everyone thinks he is close to bankruptcy, then whatever he does will not succeed, and it will be difficult for him to gain the support of other nobles. I don't doubt that the Hall family has such financial resources, but can other nobles really do it?" Facing Ember's question, Audrey just shook her head and explained softly. "Formal dresses can only be worn once, but they can be sold secondhand." Such clothes are quite popular among the middle class and wealthy merchants because they have only been worn once and were worn by nobles, so sometimes they can even be auctioned for a price higher than the original. Well, of course, if this kind of thing is discovered, it will also affect the noble's reputation. But for nobles who are not doing well financially, it is indeed a quite feasible path. Alright. While explaining to Ember, Audrey's hands didn't stop moving, and she skillfully dressed the Kurala sisters. At this moment, she was affectionately stroking the heads of the two little lawless beside her, her emerald green eyes shining brightly. Ember looked over at the sound and saw that the successfully transformed Kurala sisters had delicate faces like twins and bright silver long hair that almost reached their heels. The difference was that perhaps intentionally for distinction, Audrey had them wearing black and white princess dresses respectively. Only then did Audrey suddenly remember an important question and asked curiously. What are their names? Kurala and Kuralis. Ember said softly, they are sisters, even in death, their graves are still next to each other. Don't say such a buzzkill thing. Audrey glared at him somewhat annoyed. Although she knew their sister's ashes were in his hands, saying such a thing at this moment was a bit too much of a mood killer. Moreover, although there are extraordinary abilities to control corpses and spiritual bodies among the extraordinary, summoning spiritual bodies with ashes seems a bit too unorthodox, doesn't it? But, transformation, huh? Audrey looked towards Susie, who was looking at her eagerly from the side, and suddenly felt a little regretful. The spectator pathway doesn't seem to have this kind of ability. If Susie hadn't stolen food and accidentally consumed the spectator potion back then, she could have prepared the assassin pathway potion for Susie. Susie seemed to understand Audrey's gaze and wagged her tail with a mix of grievance and innocence. Audrey sighed softly in her heart, then looked at Ember with a hint of excitement and asked excitedly. Ember, can I take them to the garden to play for a while? Of course. Ember nodded with a smile, if Kurala and the others don't mind. Kurala, Kuralis. Audrey's emerald green eyes held a look of anticipation as she extended her hand towards the exquisite twin sisters. Would you like to come to the garden with me? The two little lawless exchanged glances, then both extended their small hands and placed them in Audrey's palm. Audrey's lips curved up slightly, blooming into an elegant and bright smile. Slightly excited, she took the hands of the two little lawless and left the room, leaving only Ember and Susie, who was lying on the ground with her head lowered, looking a bit sad. Susie, hurry and catch up. Susie's eyes lit up, and she was instantly full of energy, wagging her tail and trotting after them. Miss Audrey, who are they? Wow, they're so cute. Miss Audrey, can I touch them? As soon as Audrey left the room, she was surrounded by maids in the corridor. Their eyes were sparkling as they looked at the Kurala sisters. But the maids clearly knew their limits. Although they surrounded her, they didn't obstruct or slow down Audrey's pace, nor did they reach out rashly. They just watched eagerly from the side, talking amongst themselves, just like Susie now, who was blocked by the excited maids forming a human wall, unable to squeeze through, and could only watch longingly. To avoid the crowd, Ember left the small drawing room after quite some time. When he went downstairs to the living room, Hilbert, who had been reading the newspaper, was now looking at him with a strange expression, as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Ember walked over and sat on the sofa next to him, taking the initiative to ask. What do you want to ask? Hilbert asked curiously, are those your daughters? No, they don't look like it to me either. Hilbert nodded understandingly. After all, a noble youth like Ember might have affairs and even illegitimate children at his age, but it was impossible for him to have two daughters aged 11 or 12. Hilbert looked around, lowered his voice, and asked, are they extraordinary? Ember nodded slightly. Hilbert immediately understood. No wonder he hadn't seen the two little girls come in just now. If they were extraordinary, it made perfect sense. Hilbert immediately straightened his expression, putting on the air of someone already in the know, and asked seriously. Which sequence are they? What sequence number? Although he was the older brother, when it came to being an extraordinary, he was just a younger brother, in front of his sister Audrey. There were many things he didn't understand and could only ask Audrey or Ember. While it wasn't exactly embarrassing, it still made Hilbert a bit depressed. He was clearly the oldest, so how did he become the youngest brother? And now that he finally saw two little girls, it immediately stirred up a feeling of wanting to show off and compete. Ember gave him a deep look, immediately seeing through his thoughts, and said unhurriedly. Assassin sequence, sequence 7. Hilbert's expression froze, and he immediately wilted. How is it that everyone's sequence was higher than his? It was one thing to not compare to Ember and Audrey, but why couldn't he even compare to two 11 or 12-year-old little girls? He originally thought becoming an extraordinary was amazing, but it turned out everyone was an extraordinary. Were extraordinary beings that worthless? And these were 2 sequence 7s, just the extraordinary materials needed to buy the potions would cost upwards of £4,000. He wasn't short on money, but cultivating an extraordinary of this level wasn't an easy task. How is your potion digestion going? Seeing Hilbert like this, Ember took the initiative to change the subject. Almost there. Hilbert immediately perked up, saying enthusiastically, in another week, or half a month at most, my potion will be completely digested. Ember asked thoughtfully, where is your apothecary? Hilbert sighed softly and said, poor Laurent didn't make it. I gave his family £1,000 as compensation. But Elvin succeeded. After I divined for it dozens of times, I chose an auspicious day according to Rosal the Great, and he successfully became an extraordinary, an apothecary. Ember nodded subtly and said, you must be careful. If he says he heard a so-called oracle. Don't worry. Hilbert said without hesitation, Elvin is a loyal believer of the goddess. If he really hears a so-called oracle, I will take him directly to St. Samuel Cathedral and have him baptized. As he spoke, a hint of teasing appeared in Hilbert's eyes, and he smiled. Audrey also reminded me when she came downstairs just now to lend you Alfred's tailor to prepare a suit for you. It's about time, let's go. In such a hurry. Ember looked at Hilbert with a hint of surprise. Don't you have to work today? Hilbert shrugged, saying helplessly. Of course I have work, but the people below will handle it. I'm just a secretary, only responsible for the final compilation and reporting. And rather than being reprimanded for work mistakes, I'm more afraid Audrey will be dissatisfied with my slackness. I only have one sister. Also, after a pause, Hilbert added, the New Year's Eve party is less than half a month away. Time is a bit tight. If we delay another day or two, even if the tailor makes an excellent suit, we won't have enough time. All right then. Ember sighed and stood up from the sofa he hadn't even warmed up yet. Wait a minute. Hilbert shook his head with a serious expression. His eyes deepened, his gaze retracted, and he took out a coin with his right hand, flicking it into the air with a clang. It is suitable to go out today. It is suitable to go out today. Clap. Hilbert quickly repeated the statement, reached out to catch the tumbling bronze coin, and saw that George III's head was facing up. Excellent, let's go. Hilbert nodded with satisfaction, stood up from the sofa, and at the same time, conveniently took down his coat from the nearby hanger. Going far. Seeing this scene, Ember couldn't help but raise an eyebrow slightly. Of course. Hilbert shrugged and said frankly, the villa is only this big and can't accommodate so many people, so there are only a few dozen servants here. Most are at the manor in the suburbs. The tailor isn't usually needed, so he's naturally arranged at the manor. After a pause, Hilbert said with some annoyance, wait a moment, let me think, where is Alfred's manor? I think it's next to mine. Where is my manor again? Ember shook his head helplessly. Should he say, as expected of a noble who is the nation's largest banker? The Queen's district is a noble district, but also a villa district. Centered around Soderic Palace, circles of villas spread outwards. But for nobles, having only a villa in the city is far from enough. They must also have their own family territory and a manor located in the suburbs of Backland. Villas are for living, while manors are only occasionally used for large gatherings. Although most nobles may not necessarily use their manors in the suburbs, having one and not having one are two completely different matters. Because only with all three are they considered true nobles. Otherwise, it's like wearing the same formal wear twice, people will seriously doubt their financial situation. And when a noble's financial situation is doubted, it often means he will be kicked out of that circle, and this blow will be devastating. So even though Hilbert had not yet inherited his title and Audrey was not even an adult, their 3 siblings each had their own manor, even if they often wouldn't visit even once a year. This is also why Hilbert couldn't even remember the location of his own manor. Finally, after Hilbert managed to remember that his coachman should know the location, the two traveled by carriage through the streets, bypassing the area with the artificial lake and heading towards the northwest. After more than an hour, they finally arrived at a manor covering an extremely large area, located in the northern suburbs of the Queen's District. West End, Edward Street, number 6. Eakins Bernard pressed his black top hat, pointed to the house door behind the fountain pool, and said to Klein, Ising, and Castellana. We have traced back the various channels of information and data leakage, combined with the sketched profile outline, and with the additional help of the magic mirror, we have initially locked onto a suspect. When mentioning the magic mirror, you clearly paused, and it's unclear what price was paid to get the desired answer. Klein noticed the problem with Executor Eakins's tone and felt a strange sense of sympathy for him. The reason Executor Eakins called upon these wild extraordinary individuals to investigate the case together was because all 3 of them were involved in this case. Initially, it was due to the serial murder case, and along the way, Klein suspected that the murderer might not be human. But before the official extraordinary could react, the demonic dog was found dead at another crime scene. It was said that another dog acted righteously and killed the demonic dog. This case should have ended there, but the official extraordinary, impressed by Klein's excellent performance, asked him to analyze it further. This led to the involvement of the owner of this house, Patrick Jason, and even these detectives received death threats because of it. Asking them to investigate the case was, on one hand, because their professional abilities were indeed needed. On the other hand, it also involved considerations for protecting their personal safety. How unlucky. While listening to Executor Eakins' introduction, Klein thought silently in his heart, if I didn't want to keep this identity just in case, I probably would have already run away. As he was investigating the villa, Klein suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He almost subconsciously turned his head and saw Executor Eakins, and at the same time, was slightly surprised to find a familiar face beside him. But he could now easily control his expression, simply smiling and greeting. Hello, Mr. Executor Eakins took the initiative to introduce. This is Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, an excellent detective. He helped us find Patrick Jason. This is Dunn Smith, a night watcher from the Church of the Night. Hello, Sherlock Detective. Dunn extended his hand and shook Klein's hand symbolically, his expression seeming to carry a trace of surprise and confusion. Chapter 142, Different People, Different Fates. Hello, Mr. Dunn. Klein extended his hand and shook hands with Dunn. He still wore a smile, his expression unchanged. If it were the previous Sherlock detective, Dunn might have recognized him at a glance. Although he had previously disguised himself with rudimentary makeup skills, he still bore at least an 80% resemblance to his original appearance. But after becoming faceless, he had slightly adjusted his facial contours, even his cheekbones had changed. He made his cheekbones more prominent, making his overall appearance closer to Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock. His original black hair was dyed brownish, and his brown eyes turned deep black. This caused him to bear only an 80% resemblance to the Sherlock Moriarty he had previously created with makeup, and even his height was slightly adjusted by a few centimeters. These changes were very subtle, people who weren't particularly familiar with him wouldn't notice anything wrong, and coincidentally, Klein had almost no acquaintances in Backland. Most people could only vaguely discern some differences, but Klein could easily fool them. And the person standing before Dunn now bore at most a 60% resemblance to the original, Klein Moretti. Although this would still arouse Dunn's suspicion, it wasn't overly surprising, because no matter how the other party questioned him, the person standing before him was a completely different individual. Moreover, this was their second meeting. Although the last time, the interference of the Mercury Snake had prevented him from recognizing him, it would also indirectly influence Dunn's judgment, giving him the illusion that, I didn't recognize him last time, and I can't recognize him this time either, so it must be an illusion. However, Captain has a poor memory, so he might not clearly remember what I look like. Klein thought to himself, half mocking, half complaining. Dunn. Executor Eakins noticed something was often called out in a low voice to remind him, we have to go. Sorry. Dunn finally realized he had been shaking hands for a bit too long. Releasing his hand, he said apologetically, I'm truly sorry, Sherlock Detective. You look very much like a friend of mine. It's all right, Mr. Smith. Klein smiled and nodded, behaving very appropriately. He naturally turned around, ready to continue his investigation. Sherlock Detective. Dunn suddenly asked, forgive me for asking, but which sequence pathways extraordinary are you? Klein, with his back to Dunn, had a look of astonishment and surprise in his eyes, but his expression returned to normal when he turned around. He said candidly, I am a diviner. Dunn nodded silently, asking no further questions and saying nothing more. Meanwhile, the two detectives, Ising and Kazlana, were also attracted by the commotion here and came over curiously. Seeing that the three were present, Executor Eakins' expression became solemn. He said in a deep voice, the Night Watchers are coming with that sealed artifact. We have to leave first. Okay. Klein put away his smile and nodded silently, leaving with the members of the Mechanical Heart. Dunn watched their receding figures. Thinking of something, his expression suddenly softened considerably, and a smile formed on his lips. Not long after, a group of night watchers wearing black woolen coats jogged in. Their expressions were alert and vigilant, as if facing an extremely terrifying enemy. Thump, 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 a silver full-body armor walked in. It felt exceptionally heavy, with details adhering to an ancient style. A splash of dark red, unwashable bloodstains stained the area from the left shoulder diagonally down to the lower abdomen, which, combined with the scattered red spots elsewhere, created a scene of peculiar beauty, like unique and magnificent decoration. The person inside the armor seemed a little puzzled by Dunn's expression and asked doubtfully, "Captain, did something happen?" "Nothing." Dunn put away his smile and said calmly, "I thought of something happy." Leonard still felt a bit strange, but just as he was about to ask further, he was interrupted. "Stop dawdling, switch." Sost of the red gloves took out his pocket watch and glanced at it, his brows furrowing. He said in a deep voice, "Leonard, the master bathroom on the second floor. Hot water is ready. Don't waste time, or you'll have to return to the goddess's embrace." The silver full-body armor stopped. He raised his hand and lifted the visor, revealing the wearer inside, a handsome man with ink-black hair and green eyes. The surrounding night watchers immediately stepped forward to help Leonard take off the heavy, blood-stained armor as quickly as possible. And he didn't waste any time, heading straight for the second floor. He found the bathtub still steaming with white mist, quickly stripped off his clothes, and lay down in the hot water, not even leaving his nose exposed. "He shouldn't have recognized me, right?" Klein, who had already left far behind, walked on the street, thinking somewhat guiltily. "There's only a 60% resemblance left, he couldn't still recognize me, could he? No way, no way. I've become like this, how could he possibly still recognize me? He definitely didn't recognize me." Klein went from self-doubt to self-comfort and then to firm belief. "That's right, he definitely didn't recognize me." This wasn't something he should dwell on. The most urgent thing now was to quickly go to the police station and retrieve his 50 pounds of bail money. It took an hour just to travel from the luxurious villa of the Hall family to the manor. After they arrived at the manor, it took several more hours just for the tailor to take measurements and choose styles. By the time all this was finished, lunchtime was long past, and they could only have lunch at the manor. However, even though the Hall family's manor was uninhabited, the servants and chefs provided were of the highest standard, so the taste was naturally impeccable. Although this was Alfred's manor, when Alfred was not in Backland, Hilbert had always helped him manage it. Therefore, to the manor's servants, Hilbert was also half the master here. In regarding the arrival of the master, they naturally dared not be negligent and immediately got busy. When Ember and the others arrived at the dining room, they were greeted by an overwhelming aroma. The long table in the dining room was filled with all sorts of delicacies: pan-seared foie gras, roasted steak, roasted chicken, pan-fried sole, dussy oysters, stewed lamb, cream soup. It was no less impressive than the royal family's formal dinner. In addition, there were bottles of misty champagne, Ulmer wine, and South Wales red wine, their colors alluring under the sunlight. The servants knew Hilbert's taste, he preferred misty champagne. The variety of wines and drinks was prepared for Ember, the guest. While having lunch, Ember glanced at a passing servant and suddenly asked meaningfully, "Are there any other extraordinary individuals in the manor?" You could tell. Hilbert, who was cutting his steak, looked up in surprise. He nodded without denying it and said, "Don't worry, the extraordinary individuals in the manor are all cultivated by the Hall family." He put a small piece of cut steak into his mouth and only spoke slowly after chewing. "This isn't a secret either. Most nobles keep some guards at their manors, which is completely legal. Of course, cultivating extraordinary individuals isn't legal. The royal family only allows us to cultivate extraordinary individuals from the lawyer and arbitrator pathways. But as you know, once unspoken rules are relaxed, it's difficult to strictly restrict them. The potion formulas were originally sold to us by the royal family. Even if we secretly cultivate extraordinary individuals from other pathways, the royal family won't really say anything. This is an unspoken agreement reached between both parties. For the royal family, they can legitimately collect more taxes. And for the nobles, having extraordinary individuals as guards makes them feel more secure. After all, the churches usually dispatch official extraordinary individuals to the nobles to provide protection, but this is clearly far from enough. For example, the Church of the Night only sent one night watcher team to protect the Hall family. Well, I'm not complaining. The churches, after all, need to maintain order throughout the ruined kingdom. Their number of night watchers is very limited, so it's normal that it's difficult for them to provide us with enough guards. But because of this, the churches actually tacitly allow nobles to cultivate extraordinary individuals. Of course, the premise is not to cause trouble, otherwise, we'd have to pay a large fine for it, you understand. Hilbert shrugged. The trouble he spoke of was actually extraordinary losing control. Since nobles wanted to cultivate extraordinary, they naturally had to bear the risk of extraordinary potentially losing control. If they could resolve the issue of losing control themselves, that would be best, but if they couldn't resolve it and alarm the extraordinary of the churches, then it was only natural for them to pay the price. Ember's expression was pensive. Are there no noble children joining the Night Watcher? Or the mechanical heart and punishers? There are. Hilbert nodded, saying helplessly, actually, Father originally wanted Alfred to join the Church of the Night and become a Night Watcher. But Alfred was more eager to achieve fame and success, and ultimately chose to join the military. After a pause, Hilbert lowered his voice and said, in fact, this is the destination for most noble children. The royal family has always been the most active in recruiting noble children. If you desire to achieve fame and success, go to the military. If you want more classified extraordinary fields, you can go to Military Intelligence 9. For example, Duke Negan. Hilbert paused, then continued, he is the noble with the most land besides the king, and is also a believer of the Storm Church, so his guards also include extraordinary sent by the Storm Church, one of whom is even a Sequence 6 Wind Blessed. But that is not the strongest among the guards. The strongest is Duke Negan's secretary, a Sequence 5 extraordinary. If he can advance further, that would be the demigod realm. This extraordinary was entirely cultivated by Duke Negan's family and is completely loyal to them. I heard that Duke Negan is seeking the Sequence 4 potion formula everywhere, which should be prepared for him. Undisguised envy showed in Hilbert's eyes. After all, that was Sequence 5, just one step away from becoming a demigod, a Sequence 4. After all, although Backland is very safe, the three great churches all have saint-level archbishops stationed there, and the possibility of turmoil is small. But once attacked or even assassinated, nobles still have to rely on these guards to save their lives, not the three great churches. In this regard, wasn't the royal family also like this? The military and Military Intelligence 6, and those extraordinary secretly cultivated by the royal family, weren't they there, guards? It's just that the royal family's scale is much larger than that of the nobles, that's all. Although it sounded very logical, Ember looked at Hilbert with some suspicion, asking strangely. I remember you didn't say that before, did you? Hilbert's face flushed slightly, and he smiled bitterly. All right, I admit, I was scared. You also participated in the joint operation more than a month ago, didn't you? Facing Hilbert's question, Ember nodded slightly. Hilbert swallowed the roasted mushroom and said bitterly. That time was a joint operation between the royal family and the three great churches, but we nobles didn't receive any wind of it at all. Even more, we didn't know that there were so many extraordinary from cult organizations lurking in Backland. And one of the cult organization bases that was raided by the Night Watcher was located in Queen's District. The straight line distance from our home was even less than a kilometer. Before this, Hilbert was somewhat hesitant about becoming an extraordinary. But this, cleanse, truly taught him a lesson. He thought Backland was very safe, but countless unknown dangers were also hidden there. This undoubtedly made the nobles and rich people of the entire Backland feel scared, and they all increased the number of guards in unison. Hilbert originally only planned to cultivate 3 to 5 extraordinary of his own. But after that incident, the number of extraordinary kept in this manor alone was no less than 10, and the Hall family has more than just this one manor. As for the cost of cultivating extraordinary, you should know that even Audrey, after she comes of age, will inherit over £300,000. And Hilbert, as the heir, will inherit even more. Compared to their life safety, the cost of cultivating a dozen extraordinary is simply not worth mentioning to them. Just then, Hilbert heard a howling sound. He subconsciously looked out the window, only to see the dimness in the sky being blown away by the strong wind, and the light yellow thin mist after the rain was swept away accordingly. The leafless branches swayed, and the strong wind left a clear trace, heading straight towards the southeast. After a few seconds, everything returned to normal, as calm as before. It's rare to see such strong winds in Backland in winter, at least I don't have any impression. Hilbert looked outside the carriage, frowning slightly. Ember also looked up at the window, but after a moment, he lowered his head and put a small piece of foie gras into his mouth, saying unhurriedly. It should be an extraordinary from the Storm Church. Storm Church. Hilbert was surprised in his heart, and also asked with a hint of curiosity, which wind blessed is this? He only knew the names of the low-sequence potions in the sailor pathway, but didn't know what abilities they actually had. He just felt that the strong wind outside seemed very similar to wind blessed, so he asked this question. No. Ember shook his head slightly, and said slowly, this is at least a demigod. Hilbert was stunned at first, and then his expression changed slightly. Nominally, there was only one demigod from the 3 great churches in Backland, and that was the archbishop of each major church. Although Hilbert was not a believer of the Storm Church, he also knew that the archbishop of the Storm Church was the god of songs, Ace Snake. Could it be another joint operation of the three great churches like last time? Hilbert subconsciously glanced at Ember, but Ember didn't look like he was informed either. But for a demigod to personally chase an enemy in broad daylight, how could this be a small matter? This means that this is likely a sudden incident, and the person being pursued by a demigod is at least a sequence 5 extraordinary. Ember withdrew his gaze from the window and said, "Don't worry, the wind is going towards the East District and dock area." Hilbert shook his head with a somewhat helpless expression, and smiled bitterly. As Rosal the Great said, it is a time of trouble now. As the heir of an earl, he had always considered himself to be extremely well informed. But now, one after another, things completely beyond his expectation were happening in Backland, making Hilbert feel a strong sense of powerlessness from the bottom of his heart. It is unrelated to them now, so there is no need to worry, but what if trouble comes knocking in the future? Capture, be sure to capture them alive, or, the spiritual body. I want to know who it is. In the courtyard of a luxurious villa not far from the Holy Wind Cathedral in Chowwood District, Duke Negan, who had just escaped from the room, was gasping violently. His expression was somewhat distorted due to the shock and terror of being assassinated. He really didn't expect that after Keelingo's last time, he would be assassinated again. The wind blessed responsible for protecting him did not reply, looking around vigilantly. In just a few seconds, the members of the Duke's guard arrived simultaneously and surrounded the Duke, protecting him in the center. Whether it was the Duke or the wind blessed, although their expressions were vigilant, they were not tense. Because this place was near the Holy Wind Cathedral, and the Duke had already blown the whistle for help. As long as His Grace, the God of Songs, arrived, everything would be fine. However, as time passed, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Duke Negan's expression suddenly became somewhat panicked. Why hasn't the Archbishop come yet? Maybe. The wind-blessed's nerves were strained to the limit, and he hesitated, unable to speak. But how could the Duke not guess that the Archbishop was very likely not at the Holy Wind Cathedral at this moment? His act of arranging his mistress at the Holy Wind Cathedral had precisely harmed himself. Suddenly, bang! A female corpse, which originally had a beautiful figure and face, jumped down from the second floor and landed in front of them. Go! Get out of here! Duke Negan's expression became incomparably terrified, and he instinctively shouted out weakly. However, the next second, Duke Negan's terrified emotions exploded violently, rushing straight to his brain, drilling into his blood vessels, and covering his nerves. He heard something breaking, and felt a warmth on the back of his head. He died without any surprise, his life taken by his own fear. The leader of the Conservative Party, the largest land noble outside of the king, the brother of the current Prime Minister, a sequence 6 extraordinary, a true big figure, Duke Palace Negan, just died like this. Chapter 143, Scheming Frog Keeps Touching Your Belly. When Ember and Hilbert returned from the suburban manor to Earl Hall's luxurious villa, they saw Audrey in the garden. She was playing the game, Eagle Catches Chicken, with 2 little girls, surrounded by a group of maids. Susie was the eagle. Although she was playing the bad guy, Susie seemed to be in a very good mood, wagging her tail vigorously. Hilbert called out softly, "Audrey. Brother, Ash, is something wrong?" The maids wisely retreated to the side. Audrey, taking Kurla and her sister forward, asked with some confusion. Hilbert's expression was a bit serious, but he still feigned a relaxed smile and said, "It's nothing much. I just came to tell you to try not to go out these next few days." "Okay." Audrey was startled for a moment, then nodded gently. She knew something must have happened to make Hilbert uneasy, but she didn't ask proactively. "Ash." Hilbert turned to Ember and politely asked, "Could I trouble you to look after Audrey more?" "Of course." Ember nodded slightly. Audrey glanced at the two of them, her thoughts stirring slightly, and said softly, "Kurla, let's go back to the room. Susie, follow us." "Woof." Susie responded with a bark, wagging her tail and following them. Seeing this, Hilbert showed a somewhat helpless expression to Ember. Ember just shrugged and followed them upstairs. In the corridor, he saw Susie squatting in front of the door, pointing the way. Ember pushed the door open casually. Audrey and Kurla were inside. Looking at Ember, who had pushed the door open and entered, Audrey asked in a low voice, "Ember, what exactly happened?" Ember closed the door casually, shook his head, and said, "I don't know exactly what happened yet. I only know that the Archbishop of the Storm Church personally took action. He should be pursuing some extremely vicious extraordinary, but it probably has nothing to do with us." "I see." Audrey nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly had an idea and said, "Perhaps we could ask Mr. Fool." Ember stared at Audrey for a while. After confirming she wasn't joking, he couldn't help but retort, Do you think Mr. Fool is Doraemon? Audrey parted her red lips, about to speak, but suddenly heard barking from the corridor. It was Susie. Following that, there were faint footsteps from the corridor. Judging by the rhythm, they belonged to her mother, Caitlin. The footsteps came from far away, getting closer, and finally stopped at the room door without further movement. Audrey immediately swallowed the words she was about to say, put on a faint smile, and said with a curious expression, "I want to know more interesting stories about Rosal the Great. Can you tell me some?" Ember pondered for 2 seconds, then nodded slightly, of course. Although he didn't know much about Rosal, interesting stories, weren't they just unofficial history? He was quite good at making up stories. In the sewage ditch where polluted water flowed, Klein pressed close to the damp wall and cold pipes, hidden in the darkness, waiting for his enemy to deliver themselves. There was no light here. Ordinary people coming here could only smell the pungent stench filling the air and see nothing in their sight. But for Klein in his spiritual body state, these were not obstacles. At this moment, there was also a corpse lying in front of him, a corpse like a shadow, thin as if it had no thickness. This Sequence 5 extraordinary who had successfully assassinated Duke Negan had died silently in the gutter like this. I actually really don't want to deal with these matters. Klein sighed inwardly. If possible, he would prefer the official extraordinaries to handle all this. But the divination result showed that this Desire Apostle had successfully escaped the pursuit of the Night Watchers. Klein, who had already encountered the other party's assassination attempt, didn't want to be targeted by an enemy hidden in the shadows, so he had to deal with this Desire Apostle here. After waiting for a while, the Desire Apostle's extraordinary characteristics precipitated. It was something like a black mist. But before he could observe it carefully, a tall and heavy silver armor rushed over. Klein's heart tightened. Without hesitation, he wrapped up the Desire Apostle's spirit and extraordinary characteristics, ending the summoning. After returning above the gray fog, Klein wasn't in a hurry to perform the spiritual medium ritual. He directly left that mysterious space and entered his body in the real world. He skillfully packed up the candles and other ritual items, quickly removing the last trace. After doing all this, he created a paper substitute again, walked 4 steps counterclockwise, and arrived inside the ancient palace above the gray fog. Here, he could directly communicate with the remaining spirits like a true spiritual medium, without needing to pray to anyone or even requiring ritual assistance. He had already verified this point when communing with the marionettist, Rosago. Looking at the Desire Apostle, with brown hair and brown eyes, whose gaze was empty, Klein extended his spirituality and asked, "What exactly were you plotting?" The Desire Apostle's spirit said muddle-headedly, "Assassinating Duke Negan." Duke Negan? Him again? Who wants him dead so badly? Klein asked, slightly taken aback. Did you succeed? Yes. The Desire Apostle replied calmly, not mentioning anything else. Who instructed you? The Desire Apostle said without any change in tone. Twilight Hermit Society. In the evening, the carriage carrying Earl Hall returned to the villa. He immediately gathered the others and instructed in a deep voice. Try not to go out these next few days. Audrey was startled for a moment. This was exactly the same as what Hilbert had said in the afternoon. Dad, what exactly happened? Audrey asked softly. Earl Hall's expression was extremely solemn. He said in a deep voice, Duke Negan has been assassinated. Audrey was instantly a bit lost, feeling it wasn't real. A great noble like this, a duke who was flesh and blood, could speak and laugh, and had even gifted her a manor, just died like that. Suddenly, she experienced the cruelty and coldness of the adult world. And why Duke Negan again? The last assassination by Keelingos was targeting Duke Negan, and it's him again this time. Who exactly did Duke Negan offend? Audrey understood why Earl Hall made this decision. Although the assassination targeted Duke Negan, it couldn't be guaranteed that there was no threat to ordinary nobles like them. Perhaps someone was also trying to take advantage of the chaos to assassinate other nobles. And a great noble like Earl Hall, who was one of the foremost in the entire country, was very likely to become a target for certain individuals with intentions, so. Wait. Audrey's expression changed slightly. As if she had suddenly thought of something, she asked abruptly. Dad, have there been any other reports of nobles being assassinated recently? Earl Hall was startled for a moment. He frowned and thought for a while, then shook his head slightly. No, the most recent assassination targeting a noble was still the last time Duke Negan was assassinated by Vice Admiral Hurricane. That time you exposed Vice Admiral Hurricane in advance, which prevented his plot. It's just a pity that Duke Negan ultimately couldn't escape this calamity. Audrey silently took a deep breath inwardly, controlled her emotions well, and then pressed on with her questions. Who did it? A Sequence 5 demon. Hall sighed and said with some emotion, however, he has already been silenced. It's probably unlikely to find the mastermind behind him. But with such a major incident happening, there must be an explanation. The Prime Minister has already decided to push this matter onto the Aurora Order. The current Prime Minister, Ogwood Negan, is Duke Negan's younger brother. These two, one the greatest noble outside the king, the other the most powerful person in the parliament outside the king, could be said to wield immense influence in the ruined kingdom. Yet even so, facing the assassination by a Sequence 5 extraordinary, he ultimately couldn't escape the deadly hand. Dad. Audrey put on a somewhat nervous and fearful expression, and asked in a low voice, I want to know the details of the assassination, okay? Hall was stunned for a moment, not knowing why Audrey was suddenly interested in this. But after thinking about it, he felt that perhaps it was because Duke Negan had previously gifted Audrey a manor, making her want to contribute to finding the murderer for Duke Negan. Hall couldn't help but chuckle silently, but he didn't refuse his daughter's innocent request and informed her in detail of the information he knew. From Duke Negan's private meeting with his mistress to his assassination, and then to the Night Watchers arriving but still letting the assassin escape, he told her everything in detail. After a pause, Hall sighed again and said, in fact, the reason Duke Negan arranged for his mistress to be in Chow Wood District was because it was close to the Holy Wind Cathedral. His Grace, the God of Songs, Ace Snake, was there. He originally thought that His Grace the God of Songs would arrive in time the moment he was attacked, but the God of Songs was lured away by the enemy's bait, which led to Duke Negan's successful assassination. The Prime Minister was furious about this, and the Storm Church has also agreed to replace the Archbishop of the Beckland Diocese. Dad, I'm feeling a bit unwell. I'll go back to my room first. Audrey listened silently, then said softly. Hall didn't suspect anything. He just thought Audrey felt uncomfortable hearing about Duke Negan's assassination and comforted her. Go on, get a good night's sleep. Everything will be better tomorrow. Audrey silently went upstairs, followed by Susie, who, contrary to her usual behavior, didn't wag her tail and seemed very downcast. When they reached Audrey's bedroom, Susie instinctively wanted to follow in to comfort her owner, but Audrey suddenly turned back and whispered, Susie, stay outside the door. Susie was startled, then immediately reacted, letting out a woof, and gently wagging her tail as she squatted in the hallway. Phew. Inside the room, Audrey locked the door and took a deep breath. She had discovered something, but she couldn't share it with her family, as it would bring them danger. So the first person she thought of was Ember, but Ember had left before dinner, and Audrey didn't want to wait until they met tomorrow to discuss it, as it might be too late by then. Therefore, Audrey decided to seek help from Mr. Fool. Audrey sat by the bed, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer to Mr. Fool in ancient Hermes language. The Fool that does not belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. After chanting the honorific name, Audrey briefly described the assassination of Duke Negan, then immediately added, Mr. Fool, I request a private conversation with Mr. Lover. No. 15 Minsk Street. Hearing the sudden ethereal, layered prayer in his ear, Klein skillfully came above the gray fog and saw the crimson star symbolizing justice constantly expanding and contracting. He immediately extended his spirituality and made contact. After hearing Justice's prayer, Klein didn't hesitate at all. He once again extended his spirituality to the cluster of flames representing Ember and conveyed Miss Justice's prayer to him. He didn't rush to act, but only pulled him above the gray fog after confirming he heard Ember's response. In the magnificent hall, before the ancient, mottled bronze long table, two figures, one male and one female, quietly appeared. Mr. Lover. Audrey felt a quiet sigh of relief upon seeing the familiar figure, but quickly recounted in detail what she had heard from Hall earlier. Finally, she paused and asked, do you still remember what Miss Island said? What? Ember thought about who Island was, not immediately recalling. Audrey reminded him, Miss Island said that the first time she saw Herwin Rambus was at Hilbert's house. In that time, the reason Herwin Rambus went to Hilbert's house was to ask Hilbert for help in assassinating a nobleman. Ember immediately understood and asked, you suspect this, nobleman, is Duke Negan? Yes. Audrey said seriously, in the past few months, only 2 noblemen have been assassinated in total, Duke Negan and Baron Gramil. And Baron Gramil was assassinated because Keelingos was going to impersonate him to assassinate Duke Negan. So the nobleman Hilbert assisted in assassinating is very likely, Duke Negan. Klein's thoughts stirred, but he remained silent, maintaining the lofty posture of the fool, and did not interrupt. Ember pondered for 2 seconds, then slowly said, "Tell me your analysis." Audrey thought for 2 seconds, organized her thoughts, and quickly said, "First of all, there must be an insider around Duke Negan who provided the assassin with Duke Negan's detailed itinerary. This is why the Sequence 5 demon was able to divert God of Songs at the exact time by a feint, and took the opportunity to successfully assassinate Duke Negan. The situation last time was also very similar. Although many noblemen participated in Duke Negan's ball, it was not easy to obtain a spot for these noblemen. Not to mention having to select a nobleman like Baron Grimil from among them, who was living alone, inconspicuous, and suitable for the attack. Behind this, there must be a huge organization helping Keelingos, and that Sequence 5 demon provide information. They provided the specific information about Baron Grimil to facilitate Keelingos taking his place and assassinating Duke Negan. They also reported Duke Negan's detailed itinerary, which made it difficult for Duke Negan to escape this assassination. And the Psychological Alchemy Society perfectly fits all of this. Their high-ranking members are royal family advisors. And the group Miss Island belongs to has always been dedicated to developing members among the relatives and family members of noblemen. Even Mrs. Norma is one of their members. Audrey paused, and said solemnly, although Mrs. Norma's husband is only a hereditary viscount, Mrs. Norma herself is the younger sister of Duke Negan's wife, Della. It's even possible that Mrs. Della is also one of them. Klein's expression was somewhat shocked, but also a little strange. It must be said that Miss Justice's analysis was indeed very rigorous, well-founded, and convincing. But the problem was, that demon was killed by Klein himself, and the organization that instructed him was not the Psychological Alchemy Society. Klein thought for a moment and decided to reveal this information to the two of them. So he gently tapped the edge of the ancient long table with his index finger, attracting their attention, and slowly said, "Twilight Hermit Society." Huh. Audrey was stunned for a moment. Klein glanced at both sides separately and said in a low, soothing voice, "My subordinate was at the scene. He is looking for the organization that instructed the Desire Apostle." Audrey was completely dumbfounded. So the organization that instructed the Desire Apostle was actually the Twilight Hermit Society. Then wouldn't all her previous analysis be in vain? No, not just in vain, but it would make her look very foolish. Audrey whispered, then just pretend I didn't say anything." "Not necessarily." Ember pondered for 2 seconds, then slowly said, "Hilbert received instructions from Herwin Rambus to assassinate a nobleman, and must have already acted. This is a confirmed fact. And the only nobleman recently assassinated is Duke Negan, so the possibility of the Psychological Alchemy Society being involved is very high. Twilight Hermit Society is the mastermind, but that doesn't mean the Psychological Alchemy Society is innocent. Their relationship is likely similar to that between the Witch Sect and the Rosicrucian Order." Audrey's eyes lit up, but she remained calm and analyzed steadily. "You mean, the Psychological Alchemy Society is a subordinate organization of the Twilight Hermit Society. The Twilight Hermit Society issues tasks, the Desire Apostle is responsible for execution, and the Psychological Alchemy Society is responsible for providing intelligence support. Well, this is like the relationship between the royal family and Military Intelligence 9 and the military." The more Audrey thought about it, the more she felt this was the case. Although there was a little bit of stubbornness in not wanting to admit that her analysis was completely useless, it was more because the possibility of this speculation was indeed very high. Thinking this, Audrey subconsciously looked at the Fool. After all, the existence of the Twilight Hermit Society was revealed by the Fool. "Don't look at me, how would I know?" Klein felt a little helpless. He had only recently learned the name, Twilight Hermit Society. How could he possibly know the relationship between the Psychological Alchemy Society and the Twilight Hermit Society? But now, facing Miss Justice's gaze, he couldn't say nothing. After a brief thought, Klein leaned back in his chair and casually reminded them. "Outside, do not mention the name of that organization, and do not write it down." "Why?" Audrey blurted out, quite startled. Klein responded in a calm tone. "Whatever is said will be known. Whatever is said will be known." Audrey subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool, feeling as if Mr. Fool was emphasizing something. Mr. Fool's meaning is that as long as they are not in his divine kingdom, and not talking to him, mentioning or writing down the name, Twilight Hermit Society will be sensed by them through some method or item. This should be the meaning. What an extremely secretive and high-ranking organization. In some ways, it is even more terrifying than the churches of the Seven Gods. Klein's thoughts suddenly stirred, and he had a bold idea. If an organization like the Twilight Hermit Society truly took action, they would send people to assassinate Duke Negan, but it is unlikely they would personally make detailed plans for this assassination. This also happens to coincide with Ember's speculation. The Twilight Hermit Society is only responsible for issuing the assassination order, and the specific execution is carried out by the Psychological Alchemy Society. And if Ember and Miss Justice's speculation is true, does that mean they can completely work backwards from the Psychological Alchemy Society and find the Twilight Hermit Society by following the clues? As for this organization that the Emperor once joined, it would certainly be false to say that Klein is not interested. However, he also knows that he is not yet qualified to approach this organization, but if it were Ember, well, he might be able to fight his way through. It just depends on whether the hermits of the Twilight Hermit Society are enough for him to burn. After a moment of overthinking, Audrey asked hesitantly, "Mr. Lover, what do you think?" Chapter 144, The Fool's Thoughtful Little Hedgehog. Ember, what do you think? Miss Audrey pursed her lips, her expression a little hesitant. Although it had been initially deduced that the Psychological Alchemy Society might have been involved in the assassination of Duke Negan, it led to another, more secretive and higher-ranked organization, the Twilight Hermit Club. This made Miss Audrey wonder if she should give up on continuing the investigation. Ember's expression was extremely calm. He shook his head and said, "Don't think too much about it. We're going to deal with the Psychological Alchemy Society sooner or later anyway. It makes no difference." Quote. Miss Audrey wanted to say something but stopped. However, upon careful thought, it did seem to be the case. After all, Ember had long decided to take action against the Psychological Alchemy Society. Would he abandon his set goal because of a Twilight Hermit Club? This was clearly unrealistic. Perhaps Ember might even take action against the Psychological Alchemy Society earlier out of fear of prolonged delays causing complications. Klein also nodded silently in his heart. Afraid? Worried? Not at all. Ember probably couldn't wait for the Twilight Hermit Club to come knocking, because that way he could burn a few more people. Ember suddenly asked, "Mr. Fool, if I want to know what kind of organization the Twilight Hermit Club is, what price do I need to pay? Now that you mention this, I'm not sleepy anymore." Klein, who was afraid Ember would ask difficult questions, immediately felt relieved. He energetically tapped the edge of the bronze long table with his finger and didn't rush to make Ember pay a price, but slowly said, "The Twilight Hermit Club preserves and inherits secrets from thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. They believe that twilight is inevitable and the apocalypse cannot be avoided. They believe in the First, the Creator, and think he is not truly dead. When twilight comes, when the end of everything appears, he will awaken from his slumber, make everything return to himself, and create a new world, a new history." Then why did they assassinate Duke Negan? Miss Audrey had already composed herself at this moment, but upon hearing this, she still asked with some confusion. Klein leaned back in his chair and said leisurely, "All actions of the Twilight Hermit Club are based on the above concepts and principles, for the sake of resurrecting, or rather, awakening the true Creator. They often interfere with the progress of history and manipulate the world's trends to make them align with their own needs, thereby achieving their goals at certain junctures. If the tide of the times does not go as they predicted, they will do their best to reverse the trend. Aside from that, they just quietly observe, indifferently observing, perhaps not taking action or undertaking a commission for decades or even centuries. Interfering with the course of history, manipulating the world's trends." Listening to Mr. Fool's seemingly light words, Miss Audrey's heart churned with stormy waves, filling her with a chilling fear. If this organization was truly as Mr. Fool said, were the things she had seen in history books, whether wars, diseases, or the discovery of the South Continent, all done by this organization. If that were truly the case, wouldn't it be even more terrifying than the Seven Gods churches? No, the Seven Gods churches definitely had the ability to do the same thing. The War of Betrayal that split the Fenaport Kingdom centuries ago was a good example. Miss Audrey fell into thought. If the Twilight Hermit Club sending people to assassinate Duke Negan repeatedly was also because of this, it would mean that Duke Negan obstructed the major trend that the Twilight Hermit Club wanted, and this major trend. Miss Audrey's expression changed slightly. As if she had thought of something, she almost blurted out, "George III, Black Emperor." Klein's expression shifted slightly. According to the information they currently possessed, George III must already be preparing for the ritual to advance to Black Emperor. And his becoming a god would definitely not be in the interest of the three great churches, otherwise there would be no need to hide it from them. But to go against the three great churches, George III must have corresponding support, and it must be from a force strong enough to contend with the three great churches. Although the Aurora Order and the witch cult were involved, they were clearly not quite qualified enough. For example, this couldn't explain where George III's potion formula for advancement came from. But if the Twilight Hermit Club was secretly supporting the Black Emperor, the situation would become quite clear. George III's potion formula and God Ascension ritual were provided by the Twilight Hermit Club. Possessing the second blasphemy slate, they had this ability. And the assassination of Duke Negan was because Duke Negan obstructed the major trend they desired. Perhaps it was because Duke Negan discovered the king's secret. No, probably not. Duke Negan was a devout follower of the Storm Church. If he had truly discovered George III's secret, he should have reported it directly to the Storm Church. So it was due to other reasons. For example, perhaps Duke Negan's existence hindered the historical development that the Twilight Hermit Club desired. Klein subtly cast his gaze towards Ember, finding that he was also deep in thought at this moment. It was clear that Ember could also think of these things he could, and perhaps even guess more details, as he might possess information Klein didn't know. Resurrecting the Creator. Just as Klein had guessed, Ember was indeed lost in thought at this moment. He did know a bit more than Klein. For example, he had seen the Sun God in the past. And it could basically be confirmed that this Sun God was the Creator in the midst of Silver City. Regardless of whether this Sun God was the true Creator, it could basically be confirmed that the Creator the Twilight Hermit Club wanted to resurrect should be this Sun God. As for how the Sun God died, Ember already had the answer. The murals he discovered on that primitive island recorded everything. The one bearing the radiant cross was undoubtedly the ancient Sun God. He died during a siege, and his body was devoured after death. And there were 4 figures who devoured the ancient Sun God. One was handsome and energetic, one was majestic and bold, one had a white beard and seemed very wise. Besides these, there was also a gloomy and dark infant. As for the identities of these 4 people, Ember thought for a moment, then slowly spoke. Mr. Fool, thank you for your help. For the price of this information, I hope to pay with magical items. Klein still maintained the posture of the fool on his face, nodding with a smile. But in his heart, he was already sighing helplessly. Ember really didn't want to owe any favors. His original intention was not to ask for a price but to make Ember owe him favors, the more the better. But Ember clearly didn't appreciate this suggestion and would rather suffer a loss to settle the score. Seeing the fool nod in agreement to the transaction, Ember spoke directly. I have 2 magical items that can be used for payment. One is Rivera's Desperate Howl, and the other is the Darkless Cross. As he spoke, Ember waved his hand, materializing 2 items on the table, a pistol and a bronze green cross. This scene made Mr. Fool almost want to reach up and rub his forehead. Promise me, next time just use a proper sacrifice, okay? Rivera's Desperate Howl can fire unlimited bullets, and each shot is very powerful. It can shoot continuously and rapidly, like a miniature machine gun. Targets hit will also endure Rivera's Desperate Howl before death, experiencing different states such as pain, dizziness, and confusion, and it even has some effect on saints. The negative effect is that the user will also hear that desperate howl, just not as frequently. The Darkless Cross, after absorbing blood, can turn into a radiant cross, possessing a powerful purification effect and capable of using Sun Domain demigod level spells like Sunfire. The side effect is that due to its powerful and pure purification, the Darkless Cross repels contact with other magical items and extraordinary characteristics. Therefore, it cannot exist simultaneously with other magical items, and it also repels the holder's extraordinary characteristics. Long-term possession will cause the user's extraordinary characteristics to gradually precipitate out. For example, if the user is a Sequence 5 Extraordinary, once worn for more than an hour, the Darkless Cross will precipitate out the Sequence 5 Extraordinary characteristics, causing the holder to regress to the Sequence 6 level. After a pause, Ember added, since both of these magical items originated from the Ruin Royal family, there is also a hidden side effect. That is, they must be used cautiously when facing extraordinary individuals from the Ruin Royal family, otherwise, if discovered, you are very likely to be hunted by the royal family. Hearing this, even Miss Audrey was somewhat at a loss for words, and Klein was even more speechless, complaining in his heart. Catching one sheep and shearing it hard, huh? If this continues, the entire royal family will be stripped bare by you. Klein silently mourned for the royal family in his heart for a minute, but then quickly thought that Ember's goal was to kill George III, and immediately felt that this minor setback was nothing at all for the royal family, at most it was just an appetizer before the main course. As for the 2 items Ember had taken out, Klein was indeed quite tempted. The advantages and disadvantages of these 2 magical items were obvious. Rivera's Desperate Howl possessed powerful combat ability, but Klein couldn't guarantee that he could withstand the Desperate Howl. After all, even a demigod couldn't resist it, and Klein didn't think he was any more special than a demigod. As for the Darkless Cross, it possessed extraordinary abilities at the demigod level in the Sun domain, so its combat power was undoubtedly top-notch. But for Klein, he saw the true purpose of this item at a glance: making money. Since the Darkless Cross could extract extraordinary characteristics, it meant that he could essentially earn one sum of money twice. For example, a Sequence 5 extraordinary characteristics usually costs around £8,000. But with the Darkless Cross's ability, he could extract the Sequence 5 extraordinary characteristics and obtain a Sequence 6 extraordinary characteristics, and so on, until only the Sequence 9 extraordinary characteristics remained. This way, he could obtain a total of 5 extraordinary characteristics, with a total value of over £15,000. This meant that in a single transaction, the value nearly doubled, with a return rate close to 100%. For Klein, who was still in debt to Miss Audrey for his promotion to Faceless, this was undoubtedly a huge attraction. Klein immediately made a decision, maintaining a calm expression as much as possible, and smiled. Deal. Before he could finish speaking, Klein saw Ember push the 2 items towards him, which instantly froze his expression. He had intended to say, "I choose the Darkless Cross," but Ember had pushed both magical items over. Did this mean you didn't take out these 2 magical items for him to choose from, but rather as part of the price? Klein knew very well that although the information he provided was secret, it did not touch upon the core of the Twilight Hermit Club. Either of these 2 magical items was enough to pay the price for this information. But Ember giving both clearly showed that he didn't want to owe a favor and wanted a clear transaction. But the more this was the case, the more panicked Klein felt. On the surface, it seemed like he was getting a bargain, but in reality, that might not be the case, because who knew if Ember planned to burn him directly after settling the favor. But should he refuse now? That was even more impossible. After all, Mr. Fool couldn't just say, "Because I'm afraid you'll burn me, 1 magical item is enough." In this way, these 2 magical items became hot potatoes, as it was hard to say whether this was a test from Ember or not. And there was clearly not much time for Klein to think and hesitate, so he paused briefly and then deliberately chuckled softly, asking nonchalantly, "What else do you want to know?" Ember looked directly at Klein's figure and said in his usual calm and soothing tone, "I want to know, what is Mr. Fool's stance on the Black Emperor issue?" "I guessed right." Klein immediately breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, but his expression remained unchanged. He carefully considered his words and chuckled softly, "I have nothing to do with the Black Emperor. In fact, to some extent, I am hostile to the forces behind him. As for whether you want to act against the Black Emperor, that has nothing to do with me either. Here, I am only responsible for equivalent exchange." Klein had always felt that the matter of transferring fire was full of conspiracies. For example, the goddess initially told Ember to transferring fire, and then a series of events occurred, clearly indicating that someone was deliberately guiding Ember to kill the Black Emperor for transferring fire. Therefore, Klein had to clearly state his position, which were the 5 basic principles: no support, no opposition, no refusal, no admission, no responsibility. Whether Ember killed the Black Emperor had nothing to do with him. Klein couldn't and didn't want to interfere, let alone get involved. To put it bluntly, he didn't care about the Black Emperor's life or death, and he didn't even care about the lives or deaths of those gods in the sky, as long as Ember didn't come to burn him. Is that so? Ember nodded thoughtfully and then fell silent, not expressing any opinion. But this made Klein subtly uneasy. What had happened during Ember's trip to the ancient times? Why had his behavior changed so much? What's with this sudden silence? Are you hesitating whether to attack him now? No way, no way. I've never tricked you in anything. And you still owe me a favor. You don't really want to burn me directly, do you? Mr. Fool. Audrey also vaguely sensed that the atmosphere was a little off and asked softly, "Do I need to pay any price?" Miss Justice is really a good person. While being moved by Miss Justice's thoughtful actions, Klein quickly came up with a response and smiled. "No need. Mr. Lover has already paid a sufficient price." Mr. Fool. Ember also slowly said, "Thank you for your help." Klein leaned back in his chair and smiled. As I've always said, I like equivalent exchange. This transaction was actually not equivalent, but now it was. Mr. Fool seems a little nervous. Audrey watched Klein's movements, and a disrespectful thought suddenly popped into her mind, which startled her. How could she comment on a god? Ever since Ember lectured her last time, she felt that she seemed to be losing respect for gods. Even for major events like assassinating the king, assassinating a quasi-god, she didn't have too strong a reaction. And now, facing Mr. Fool, she actually had the same thought. But she couldn't be blamed for this. After all, although she couldn't see through Mr. Fool's expression and appearance, Mr. Fool's action of leaning back in his chair after the conversation was too obvious. It was like someone who had been mentally tense suddenly relaxed. It was as if Mr. Fool seemed to be afraid. No, Audrey, you can't have such thoughts. Mr. Fool might be afraid of Ember suddenly attacking, but this doesn't mean that Mr. Fool's status will be lowered because of this. He is still a high and mighty god. This doesn't mean that the god's status is gone, it just means that Ember's strength is too strong. But precisely because Ember's strength is sufficient, he was drawn into the god's schemes. However, from the current perspective, Mr. Fool doesn't seem to be involved. His encounter with Ember was just a coincidence. And now that the misunderstanding is resolved, this is undoubtedly a good thing, which is conducive to the unity within the Tarot Club. Audrey thought, carefully observing Ember and Mr. Fool. Covered by the gray fog, she couldn't see through either of them, but Audrey didn't need to see through them. She just considered her words and asked softly, "Mr. Lover, do you need my help in gathering information on Herwin Rambus?" She was still on the topic, easing the atmosphere. But if Ember was trying to find the Twilight Hermit Club, starting with the Psychological Alchemy Society was the best option, and Herwin Rambus, as a high-ranking member, was the best choice. It's best not to. Ember thought for a moment and shook his head. The plan remains unchanged, we will act on New Year's Day. Before that, do not do anything out of the ordinary that would arouse suspicion. Okay. Audrey immediately understood and nodded lightly. She knew that Ember was afraid of alerting the enemy. After all, if something happened to Herwin Rambus, it would likely make George III vigilant. And for Ember, killing George III was more important than Herwin Rambus. Rather than acting early and alerting the enemy, it was better to catch them all on New Year's Eve. Audrey thought for a moment and then deliberately said playfully, "In matters like this, Mr. Lover, perhaps you can pray for the help of the angel under Mr. Fool." Mr. Fool's expression instantly stiffened. He had just praised Miss Justice as a thoughtful little cotton jacket, and now she was exposing his weakness. Although he knew that Miss Justice's original intention was to ease or even bring them closer, the problem was, where did he have an angel under him? But seeing Ember's questioning gaze, Klein couldn't not respond, so he could only be ambiguous and pretend to be profound. "I can provide covert assistance." "Okay." Ember nodded slightly, without any suspicion, only thinking that Mr. Fool wanted to prove his neutrality. Chapter 145, Klein, dig the grave. Must dig the grave. Inside the luxurious villa of the hall, the gray fog in front of Audrey quickly faded, and the figures of the fool and lovers had disappeared. She walked to a life-sized mirror, pursing her lips, and for the first time had an urgent idea of improving her sequence for reasons other than interest. If Duke Negan, who is a Sequence 6 Beyonder himself and is under the strict protection of Sequence 5 Beyonders and a large number of Beyonders, can be assassinated, let alone my father, who is just an ordinary person. Although there are quite a few Beyonders in the family, and the Goddess's Church will provide additional protection, it still doesn't make me feel at ease. Duke Negan's guards would only be stronger than this. And no one knows the reason why that organization sent people to assassinate Duke Negan. Just saying that he blocked their great momentum is a bit too broad. Who knows if my father will also be deemed a noble blocking their momentum. Come on, Audrey, advance to Sequence 6, Sequence 5 as soon as possible, hide in the shadows, and be the last line of defense for father, mother, and brothers. Well, I can also ask Ember for help and purchase some powerful mystical items from him. However, I don't have much cash now, and a few £1,000 might not be enough to buy any powerful mystical items. However, I can discuss this directly with my father. The assassination of Duke Negan must have also stimulated him, and he probably won't mind spending money to buy some relatively powerful mystical items. Thump, thump. Just as she was thinking, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. Audrey quickly composed her expression, opened the door, and found Hilbert standing at the entrance, saying with a somewhat excited smile, "Audrey, I have good news to tell you. Alfred sent a telegram saying he will be back in 2 days." Huh? Audrey was startled and said in a questioning tone, "But isn't Alfred in East Balam? Why would he suddenly come back?" Alfred is her second brother, Hilbert's younger brother, and has always served in the military. A few months ago, he was transferred to serve in East Balam. With the military achievements he repeatedly made in the colony, his military rank rose rapidly. But generally speaking, officers sent to East Balam would stay there for at least a year. One reason was to accumulate seniority, and the other was to build more achievements. After all, on the North Continent, countries coexist peacefully. Let alone war, there hasn't even been friction for hundreds of years. This is a good thing for the public, but not necessarily for soldiers eager to achieve merit. Therefore, Compared to the North Continent, the South Continent is the best choice for soldiers. Because in the colonies on the South Continent, friction and even wars between countries are tacitly allowed, so only there can they gain military achievements the fastest and most. Of course, colonies at sea can also quickly accumulate military merit, but this part of the merit is limited to the navy, as the army cannot deal with those pirate ships on the vast ocean. For Alfred, gaining military achievements as quickly as possible and as much as possible, thereby obtaining a higher military rank or even a noble title, is what he wants to do most now, and what he should do most. Although this will separate him from his family for a long time, and he will miss the New Year's Eve party and his sister's coming-of-age ceremony, it is all worth it. Audrey originally thought Alfred would at least wait until he accumulated enough military achievements to earn a noble title before returning to Backland. By then, he might return with the rank of brigadier general or even major general, which would be the best choice. Alfred couldn't possibly not understand this principle, so why would he suddenly return to Backland? It couldn't be that he didn't want to miss her coming-of-age ceremony, could it? Isn't it good that he's coming back? Hilbert asked back, and then said with a smile, "You don't have to think too much. He's coming back this time because of a military transfer order. And isn't this just right? There are still half a month until the New Year's Eve party, and he can definitely make it. After all, that's your coming-of-age ceremony, Audrey." Audrey didn't reply, seemingly lost in hesitation. Hilbert seemed to see through his sister's thoughts and asked with a smile, "Are you worried about Ash's matter?" Audrey blinked. "Don't worry." Hilbert chuckled. "Alfred's tailor is already designing a dress for Ash, and that won't change even if Alfred comes back. As for Alfred, he can wear the dress designed last year." "Of course." Hilbert deliberately paused for a while, shrugging his shoulders, and said, "I think he probably won't mind wearing his military uniform to the New Year's Eve party. After all, for a young lieutenant colonel, this is undoubtedly a symbol of honor." "I see." Audrey pretended to be relieved, as if she was really worried about the dress. But in reality, she was worried about another problem. Ember would assassinate George III at the New Year's Eve party, and if Alfred returned and attended the New Year's Eve party, would he be forced to participate in the fight because of his military status and thus conflict with Ember? Audrey thought silently in her heart, "I must find a way for them to meet beforehand. There should be enough time." While thinking, another doubt surfaced in the girl's mind. Why was Alfred suddenly transferred back to Backland? Why him? Hillston District, 117 Bonningham Road. Ember left the washroom and came to the living room to see he and Corliss busy preparing dinner. Dinner was ready, and the Caleres sisters were sitting quietly and obediently at the dining table waiting to eat. And Furs was still lying on the sofa like a lazy fish, applying a mask that was said to hydrate, leisurely reading a book there. Ember. After Ember sat down, he organized her words and said, "There's a new Beander gathering in the East Borough recently, and I was also invited. This afternoon was the first gathering, and I participated." He paused, then continued, "And the key point is that the organizer of the gathering calls himself Mr. X. Mr. X. Furs also became interested and asked curiously, "Aurora Order?" Having joined the Tarot Club, they had also learned a lot of secret information and knew that the divine envoys within the Aurora Order used names like Mr. A and Mr. X. The Beander gathering they often attended before was organized by Mr. A, and now there was another Mr. X, making it hard not to suspect the other party's identity, and this suspicion is usually correct. For no other reason than the people of the Aurora Order are all lunatics. They know they are wanted criminals, yet they still reveal their real names to the public, without any concealment or disguise. It seems they are not at all worried about informants from official Beyonders among the attending Beyonders, as if they are deliberately waiting for the official people to come knocking. Of course, Furs would not try to understand why they do this. After all, the thinking of lunatics is always so puzzling. Should be. He nodded seriously, her expression solemn, and he released a commission at the first gathering, asking the Beyonders who participated to find members of the Abraham family or Beyonders of the Apprentice Pathway. As long as there is any information related to Beyonders of the Apprentice Pathway, he will buy it at a high price. Apprentice. Ember's expression shifted slightly. He had just met Mr. A not long ago and learned from him that Mr. X had secretly infiltrated Backland with the purpose of finding members of the Abraham family. And now a Mr. X suddenly appeared, and he happened to be looking for Beyonders of the Apprentice Pathway. This cannot be explained by coincidence. If it were Mr. A, Ember wouldn't be very interested. After all, Mr. A still had some use. But this Mr. X clearly had no use value. On the contrary, his Beander characteristic was very valuable. After all, he was a Sequence 5 Beander of the Apprentice Pathway, and his Beander characteristic could completely be made into a second teleportation ring. Moreover, killing this traitor of the Abraham family could also earn a favor from the Abraham family. Although Abraham already owed a huge favor, no one would think they had too many favors. Ember asked thoughtfully, "When is the next gathering?" "Every Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. He explained. However, he values information about Abraham very much and said that anyone with information in this regard can go to him at any time. Furs muttered in a low voice. Why do they all like to hold gatherings at 3 in the afternoon? Fortunately, it's not Monday. Ember thought for a moment and instructed. Furs, find an opportunity to inform Mr. Dorian and tell him that Mr. X of the Aurora Order is looking for them. Inform me in advance of the next gathering, and I will attend with you. Furs and he exchanged glances and said in unison. Okay, no problem. A new day. Early in the morning, Klein received £1,000 in cash with the newspaper, carrying the fresh scent of ink. This was the bounty paid by the machinery hivemind. This put Klein in a good mood, and he specially added a sausage to his breakfast. Having lost the threat of the Desire Apostle, Klein, feeling lighthearted, was very relaxed, so he decided to go to the Crag Club for lunch. Since he owed Miss Justice a large sum of money, this frugal behavior had become his habit. After enjoying lunch, Klein silently praised himself for his frugality in his heart, then took a public carriage to the East Borough, changed into a worker's outfit, and came to the Bravehearts bar. Klein leisurely walked to the bar and ordered a glass of South Wales beer, while casually asking, "Is Kaspar's cannon here?" He was here to find Sharon, but the only way he could contact Sharon was through Kaspar's. The bartender glanced at him. "You haven't been here for a long time. Since the large-scale crackdown by the official organization more than a month ago, Kaspar's was scared and ran away. If you want to buy some items, there is a new merchant now." "Who?" Klein asked casually. "The old man, he's in the third billiards room," the bartender said without lifting his head. Klein immediately got up and slowly walked to the familiar place, knocking on the slightly ajar door. "Come in," a voice came out. Klein entered the billiards room, looked at the boy standing beside the pool table, closed the door behind him, and smiled. "Long time no see. Didn't you go to Pritz Harbor?" This boy was Ian, whom Klein had met when he first arrived in Backland, and through him, he was involved in a series of troubles. In the end, he had to entrust Miss Justice to ask Mr. A to kill the envoy of the Intis Republic to barely resolve the situation. Ian composed his startled expression and muttered, "I spent 2 months in Pritz Harbor and found that those guys were savage and fierce, without any courtesy or care for children, so I had to return to Backland and resume doing what I'm good at." Later, when Kaspar's decided to run away, he handed over his business and connections for me to inherit. Before Klein could speak, he added, "Detective, I've always kept it in mind, I still owe you 2 requests." Klein suddenly felt a toothache. 2 requests. It was fine when he didn't mention it, but as soon as he did, he remembered that he still owed Ember 2 requests. Although Ember wasn't in a hurry to collect, this made Klein even more uneasy. He wanted Ember to owe him a favor, but that didn't mean he wanted to owe Ember a favor. Although he was almost certain that Sharon had likely abandoned this stronghold, Klein still exchanged a few pleasantries with the other party. After all, leaving without doing anything would inevitably arouse suspicion. Leaving the bar, Klein got into a rented carriage and headed straight for the East Borough. He looked at the gloomy weather outside the window, feeling a bit emotional and sighing, when a faint, ethereal voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "What do you want?" Klein's hair instantly stood on end. Only after seeing who was sitting in front of him did he relax and smile helplessly. "Sharon, do you always appear like this without a sound? Next time I'll knock on the window." Sharon, wearing a Gothic court gown and a small black soft hat, nodded emotionlessly. She paused and then asked with a hint of confusion in her tone, "Have you advanced to Faceless?" "Yes," Klein admitted straightforwardly. Klein hadn't expected Sharon to be the first one to notice, after all, they hadn't met many times in total. "Your change is very obvious." Sharon's tone was as calm as ever, "but in that case, you probably no longer need the characteristic of a human skin shadow. Do you know where there is one?" Klein's eyes flashed as he asked. He had also asked Sharon to look for the main material for Faceless more than a month ago, and he didn't expect her to still remember. "In the tomb of an ancient noble in Whitecliff Town." Sharon explained succinctly. "However, if you don't lack the characteristic of a human skin shadow, it's best not to try to enter. It's very dangerous there. I just asked casually, I definitely won't go. After all, even Sharon thinks it's dangerous, so if he went, he would definitely be in more trouble than not." Klein complained in his heart and asked casually, "Do you know which ancient noble's tomb it is?" Sharon said without hesitation, "His surname is Aemon." Klein's heart immediately turned cold. In his mind, the figure wearing a black classical robe and a pointed soft hat of the same color appeared. Broad forehead, thin face, black eyes, black hair, wearing a crystal monocle. Klein had an extremely deep impression of this enemy who tried to invade the gray fog. His first thought was even to inform Ember to dig Amon's grave. Chapter 146, Another Tarot Club Meeting. December 20th, Monday. At 2:45 p.m., Klein, carrying newspapers, entered the washroom and actively prepared for this week's Tarot Club meeting. Exactly 3 p.m., crimson and illusory light rose, and the members of the Tarot Club appeared one by one on both sides of the bronze long table. Justice stood up, cast her gaze towards the head of the bronze long table, and curtsied with a lift of her skirt. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Lover. Good afternoon." Her light and pleasant voice broke the seemingly eternal silence above the Fool. Miss Justice's greeting had become a custom of the Tarot Club, and no one would try to interrupt her at this time. After greeting the members of the Tarot Club, Audrey looked at the figure shrouded in gray fog and said, "Respected Mr. Fool, I have obtained 3 new pages of Russell's diary." Audrey's mood quickly became cheerful because these diaries were proactively delivered by Miss Island. She knew that Audrey was interested in Rosal the Great's diary, so to further win her over to join the Psychological Alchemy Society, she would proactively bring some diary pages during each lesson. Magician also stood up and bowed slightly, saying, "Mr. Fool, I have copied down 3 more pages of Russell's diary." "Not bad." Klein quietly sighed in his heart. Miss Magician, backed by the Abraham family, could collect Russell's diary even more easily than Miss Audrey, thanks to the Abraham family's connections and financial resources spread across the world. Almost every Tarot Club meeting in the past few weeks, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment would consistently contribute a total of 6 pages of Russell's diary. In fact, Klein suspected she had more diary pages. The reason she only contributed 3 pages was because her strength was only sequence 8, and she could only remember 3 pages. "What reward do you want?" Klein asked with a smile. Audrey answered sincerely, "Can it be considered a reward for your previous answer to my question?" Furs thought for a moment and asked, "Mr. Fool, I hope to accumulate the rewards." Klein chuckled lightly and nodded indifferently. "All right." The two quickly materialized a total of 6 pages of the diary and passed them to Mr. Fool. Klein took them and saw that the first page read, "April 1st. I'm a bit suspicious if today is April Fool's Day, but thinking about it carefully, I realize there's no such holiday as April Fool's Day in this world. What did the Emperor discover?" Klein's eyes flickered slightly as he continued to read. "As I said before, there are at least 5 painting worlds in this world. The Knowledge Church, the Storm Church, the Church of the Blazing Sun, the Earth Mother Church, and the Aurora Order, which is a cult, each have one. And according to the latest intelligence I've found, all 5 of these painting worlds were painted with the blood of a powerful true god. And I suspect that this powerful true god is the creator worshipped by that organization." Creator. Klein's expression changed slightly, and he forcefully suppressed his emotions as he continued to read. "In ancient times, a great war against the Creator once broke out. The existing 4 Orthodox churches and the Aurora Order likely all participated in it, otherwise it cannot explain why they could each obtain a painting world. This is likely their spoils of war. This means that at least 5 true gods simultaneously attacked that Creator, ultimately leading to his fall. Furthermore, I strongly suspect that the Church of the Night also possesses a painting world, and it is highly likely to be the original world. The painting of the painting world is clearly related to Black Soul, and the painters of those 5 painting worlds must have come from the original world. And if we think along this line of thought, the Church of the Night is very likely the culprit who organized the other true gods to besiege the Creator. But this cannot explain another problem, which is why the Knowledge Church, the Storm Church, and the Church of the Blazing Sun are mutually hostile, and the 3 great churches are simultaneously hostile to the Aurora Order, and vice versa. The Aurora Order is also simultaneously hostile to these 3 great churches, but the Church of the Night and the Earth Mother Church can somehow stay out of it. Is it because of gender? Just kidding, it's definitely not such a superficial reason as gender. Their mutual hostility is very likely due to conflicts of interest, but I haven't been able to find the key to their conflicts of interest yet. After all, these are all true gods, sequence 0 at the pinnacle of extraordinary. What kind of conflict of interest is worth them being mutually hostile? Hiss. I don't know, and I don't dare to ask. This page of the diary ended here, but Klein's mood did not calm down because of it, as Rosal clearly knew something extraordinary. But he didn't dare to write it down, not even in Chinese that others couldn't understand. And what he discovered, Klein could also guess. Rosal had previously speculated about the truth of the law of conservation of extraordinary characteristics, suspecting that all extraordinary characteristics originate and only originate from the first creator, so they do not increase, and the total amount is fixed. If this assumption is true, does it indicate that the Lord who created everything encompasses everything, integrating the feminine, masculine, and neutral? If this is indeed the case, it means that all extraordinary characteristics and uniquenesses originate from the Creator. The rebellion of the true gods was precisely to plunder the extraordinary characteristics and uniquenesses from that Creator, and only by doing so could they become true. Sequence 0 feet. As for the reason why those few true gods were mutually hostile, it was very likely because if they wanted to become the next Creator, they had to plunder the other party's uniqueness and extraordinary characteristics from them. As for why the Church of the Night and the Earth Mother Church could stay out of it, Klein also had no answer. However, compared to Rosal the Great, Klein also knew some information that Rosal did not. For example, the Creator worshipped in the land abandoned by God is likely not the same person as the ancient Creator, and for example, the Amen family claims to be descendants of the ancient sun god, as well as the information he obtained from the divination of the Darkless Cross, the man wearing a cross who said, "Let there be light." The sense of déjà vu from the phrase, "let there be light," is too strong, making it very difficult for Klein not to feel suspicious. But he didn't dare to continue thinking deeply and instead flipped through the remaining diary pages as if to cover up something. These diary pages were far less shocking than the previous content, but they also revealed some secrets that ordinary people would find difficult to know, such as June 5th. Obtained in ancient scripture. It actually mentioned the name of the original witch, not just her honorific name. Her name is Kik, that's a male name. Is this ancient scripture fake? Kik, could the original witch also have been a man before? Klein almost raised his hand to pinch his chin. This actually corroborated Rosal's speculation about extraordinary characteristics. Perhaps this original witch also participated in the siege against the Creator. Klein collected his thoughts, looked at Justice, Mr. Lover, and the others, and smiled. "You may begin." Justice raised her hand slightly and said without any concealment, "My request is the same as before. A complete pituitary gland of a young mind dragon, or 60 milliliters of black patterned lizard spinal fluid, and 1 fruit of the bewildering wind chime tree." After Justice finished speaking, she looked at Furs. She knew that Furs was backed by the Abraham family. Therefore, Furs was the most likely person to help her acquire these materials at the Tarot Club. "I have no leads, but I will continue to keep an eye out for you." Furs shook her head. She had asked the Abraham family for help, and they also said they would try their best to collect them. But the Abraham family had declined after all, their glory no longer present. They had many extraordinary items of the door pathway, but extraordinary items of other pathways were not within their collection scope. "I have a lead on the bewildering wind chime tree." Hanged Man pretended to ponder for 2 seconds before speaking, "But I cannot help you acquire the materials in the near future. You might have to wait for a while." "It's all right, I'm not in a hurry." Audrey smiled lightly. She had only recently become a psychologist, and there was still a long time before she needed to consume the potion. Klein really wanted to remind Audrey not to rush. After all, Ember had given him the Darkless Cross as a reward, and Ember would sooner or later trouble Herwin Rambus. Klein did not think Herwin Rambus could escape his clutches, which meant Ember could easily obtain a sequence 4 extraordinary characteristics. And Klein could use the Darkless Cross to help Miss Audrey separate the sequence 5 and sequence 6 extraordinary characteristics she needed for free, as long as she gave him the remaining sequence 7 to sequence 9 extraordinary characteristics as a reward. But these words were clearly not suitable for Mr. Fool, so he couldn't say them. This made Klein secretly ponder how to reasonably give the Darkless Cross to Mr. World and have Mr. World make the offer. This wasn't difficult. After all, Mr. World's identity was already recognized as Mr. Fool's benefactor, Your Grace. And as Mr. Fool, it was perfectly reasonable for him to bestow 1 or 2 mystical items upon his benefactor, Your Grace, right? Mr. Lover. Seeing that no one else spoke, Hanged Man turned his gaze to Ember and said, "I hope to obtain the potion formula for the Sailor Pathway sequence 5 feet Ocean Singer." Alger had actually been promoted to Wind Blessed over a month ago and had originally planned to immediately seek Ember to purchase the sequence 5 potion formula, but Ember had already gone to the land abandoned by God at that time, forcing him to temporarily put his plan on hold. Now that Ember had returned, he naturally made the trade request immediately. "All right." Ember nodded slightly and said, "At the next Tarot Club meeting, I will find a way to obtain the potion formula and give it to you." "Thank you." Hanged Man immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He had complete faith in Mr. Lover's ability to obtain potion formulas. In the past month, he hadn't completely pinned his hopes on Mr. Lover but had been trying to obtain the Ocean Singer formula through his own channels and transactions within the Tarot Club, but each time he returned empty-handed. After all, this belonged to Sequence 5, the level closest to demigod. The corresponding formula was already in a situation where there was a price but no market. Even with a lot of money and a willingness to pay a significant premium, it was difficult to buy. Normally, joining the corresponding church or organization is the most effective way to obtain similar formulas. But as a member of the Storm Church, Alger could not rely on this method because of certain secrets. He had to conceal his true strength to gain freedom of action and minimal monitoring. After a brief silence, Hanged Man looked thoughtfully at Miss Justice. I want to know the details of the assassination of Duke Negan and the changes in Backland's political situation afterwards. What reward do you need? Why are you asking me? Audrey was a little confused, but she quickly understood Mr. Hanged Man's intention. As someone closely related to the Storm Church, he should already have a thorough understanding of the specific details of this case. But what he wanted to know was likely the organization or force behind the Desire Apostle, but it wasn't convenient to directly ask Mr. Fool, thinking it would be too abrupt and imply questioning. So, he circled around and opened the topic by asking her. Understanding this, Audrey slightly curved her lips and said, No reward is needed. Is it not the purpose of our Tarot Club to freely exchange common knowledge information about our respective areas? Only in this way can our Tarot Club develop and grow rapidly. She thought with a strong sense of ownership. Your words make me feel ashamed. Hanged Man was stunned for 2 seconds, then placed a hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Audrey pursed her lips lightly and carefully chose her words. The Desire Apostle, using a special scene and his ability to ignite intense emotions and desires with himself as the fuse, completed the assassination of Duke Negan and successfully broke through at the cost of serious injuries, diving into the sewers, and was eventually killed by Mr. Fool's benefactor, Your Grace. And Mr. Fool's goal is to pursue the organization that instructed the Desire Apostle. At the same time, Duke Negan's death caused a split in the House of Lords. Although his eldest son is about to inherit the title and become a member of the House of Lords, his prestige is insufficient to quell the disputes. Nearly 10 members of the House of Lords jointly proposed that newly ennobled nobles also have the opportunity to obtain fixed seats. Simply put, this means allowing those who were ennobled through political donations, charitable contributions, and the purchase of corresponding land to become members of the House of Lords. Although she said she was willing to share some information, she also hid some key details. For example, the name of the Twilight Hermit Club, and that the Psychological Alchemy Society is likely an affiliated organization of the Twilight Hermit Club. This both answered Mr. Hanged Man's question and maximized his interest, making him willing to pay for this answer. As for what kind of reward he should pay, isn't it obvious? Of course, it's the fruit of the bewildering wind chime tree. Klein's expression became a little strange. It was obvious that he also guessed some of Miss Justice's thoughts, but precisely because of this, he felt a little out of place. Miss Justice has learned badly. This is simply deeply understanding the truth that the free is the most expensive. Who did she learn this from? Klein strongly resisted the urge to rub his forehead. He knew without thinking that it must have been Mr. Lover. And just as they had guessed, although Alger nodded expressionlessly on the surface, a stormy sea raged in his heart, both shocked and excited. He really wanted to impulsively pay a reward to get the answer from Justice or Mr. Fool, but in the end, he held back. Mr. Lover. Son, Derek impatiently raised his hand and asked somewhat excitedly, I want to know if the place you reached when you went to the land abandoned by God was the Giant King's court. Chapter 147, The Truth Behind the Mist. The son looked at Ember with anticipation, clearly hoping for a precise and affirmative answer from him. After all, for the Silver City, located in the land abandoned by God and perpetually shrouded in darkness, a sky where sunlight could be seen was more precious than anything. If the space Ember was in truly existed within the land abandoned by God, then Derek would find a way to reach it no matter what. Even if he was only a Sequence 8 Priest of Light now, even if he had just become qualified to join the Silver City's exploration team, wasn't this at least bringing a ray of hope to the perpetually dark Silver City? Even though his expression couldn't be clearly seen, everyone could sense the son's almost overflowing desire. This reminded Audrey of a famous quote by Rosal the Great, I could have endured the darkness if I had not seen the sun. Perhaps this quote couldn't be more fitting to describe Mr. Sun. Ember looked at the son's figure, his tone calm yet with a hint of sigh. Unfortunately, that place is indeed located in the land abandoned by God, but it is likely an ideal land that you can never reach, existing only in illusion. Hearing Ember's words, the sun remained silent, frozen in place. Even with the gray fog covering him, others could almost see his eyes transition from full of hope to disappointment, filled with loneliness and desolation. What do you mean by ideal land? Aside from Klein, who knew the inside story, the other members of the Tarot Club were stunned, then fell into thought. Mr. Fool had personally said that the place Ember went to was the land abandoned by God, and Ember had also personally admitted this. Since both were in the land abandoned by God, why couldn't the sun reach it forever? Was it because of the special nature of the Giant King's court? This possibility wasn't ruled out, as it was, after all, the former residence of the Giant King, and not just anyone could reach it, one needed sufficient strength. But the Silver City had demigods. Even more than one. Did such strength still not qualify them to reach the Giant King's court in Ember's eyes? Did that mean that to go there, one had to be at least an angel of sequence 2 or higher? Angel. The Hanged Man's expression changed slightly, this guess startled even himself. He had considered that Ember might be a saint of sequence 3, but he hadn't dared to imagine he would be an angel. Because in the Storm Church, only the Pope had the strength of sequence 2. No, perhaps it was far more than that. The Hanged Man's heart tightened as he thought of another possibility. All along, his attitude towards Mr. Fool had been mostly cautious. Although he was initially somewhat suspicious, Mr. Fool's power had made him deeply believe that this was a resurrected god. And as a member of the Tarot Club, the Hanged Man had always felt that Ember was different from himself and the others. Firstly, in terms of strength, including himself, the others were low sequence extraordinary when they joined the Tarot Club. Even Miss Justice and Mr. Sun were not extraordinary, but they could join the Tarot Club because they each represented a faction. Either ruined nobility or the land abandoned by God. Only the lover was different. As soon as he joined the Tarot Club, he possessed strength powerful enough to easily kill a demigod, yet he initially only called himself an apprentice. Alger had thought this was just a disguise, but now it seemed it might be a hint and a metaphor. The lover was indeed an apprentice, but not a sequence 9 apprentice, but an apprentice on the path to godhood, an apprentice of the Fool. Mr. Lover is very likely already on the path to becoming a god. The Hanged Man almost subconsciously denied this possibility because it made him somewhat incredulous. But combining the details he had previously not paid much attention to, such as the clearly closer relationship between the Fool and the Lover compared to the other members of the Tarot Club, such as the Fool occasionally seeking help from the Lover, and such as the Lover being able to freely take out magical items in Mr. Fool's kingdom without restriction, as well as the Lover constantly pursuing the Black Emperor, who represents another god. All of this indicated that the Lover, whose goal was to hunt the Black Emperor, had always held a status equal to Mr. Fool. A resurrected god, and an angel about to become a god. The Hanged Man's heart surged the more he thought about it, because this meant the Tarot Club had at least 2 deities. This was something no other power could achieve. And how honored was he to be able to join? Alger's emotions were incredibly stirred, but his deep composure forced him to suppress all these emotions. He glanced at the others and found that except for Miss Justice, who seemed to have some realization, they were all in a state of confusion, which further solidified his idea of keeping it a secret. Some things are better kept to oneself, there's no need to speak them out. The Sun clearly didn't see this, he just lowered his head with a somewhat low mood, his voice subdued. I understand, thank you for the information, Mr. Lover. Ember looked at the Sun's dejected appearance, pondered for a moment, and then said. If you merely wish to see sunlight, I can offer you a suggestion. Derek raised his head, his previously lusterless eyes regaining a glimmer of hope. To the west, Ember slowly said, go directly west to the sea, cross the Sonia Sea, and you can reach the world we are in. Well, if you can't distinguish directions, you can head towards the Giant King's court, it's directly west of the Silver City. Derek was stunned for a moment, as if he hadn't reacted yet, while the others were already too shocked to speak. Although Ember's words were not meant for them, the information contained within them overturned their understanding. Mr. Lover. The Hanged Man couldn't help but ask, do you mean that the land abandoned by God is at the end of the Sonia Sea? Ember nodded slightly. Indeed. While the others were still contemplating the meaning of these words, Klein already had a clear answer in his heart. He had once read in Rosal the Great's diary that Rosal suspected the land abandoned by God was in the legendary East Continent, at the end of the Sonia Sea. And Ember's words could directly prove Rosal the Great's speculation. The land abandoned by God is the legendary East Continent. Then, according to this deduction, does the West Continent truly exist at the end of the Misty Sea? It is said to be the hometown of the elves, but what happened that prevented the elves from returning to their hometown, leaving them trapped on Sunia Island? Moreover, The South Continent, the North Continent, the West Continent, the East Continent, all 4 continents are separated by the sea. Klein frowned slightly. He mentally pieced together the rough shapes of the 4 continents according to the existing maps, and the resulting map gave him a strange sense of déjà vu. Having received a positive reply, Derek regained hope and said somewhat excitedly, "Thank you for your help, Mr. Lover. What kind of reward do you wish to receive for this suggestion?" A thought almost subconsciously popped into the minds of everyone in the Tarot Club simultaneously. What an honest child. Ember pondered for 2 seconds, thought for a moment, and then said, "I hope to learn about the Silver City's creation myth in detail." Derek seemed to breathe a sigh of relief upon hearing Ember's request, as it was not a particularly difficult one for him. His previously tense body relaxed, he organized his thoughts, and then began. The omniscient and omnipotent God created everything and entered slumber. The 8 ancient gods divided the authority left by the Lord and became the gods who ruled the sky, the earth, and the ocean, who ruled reality, the spirit world, and the star realm, who ruled the various races, the true gods, the ancient gods. Some of them fell in their mutual struggles, while others were stripped of their authority after the creator of everything, the omniscient and omnipotent God, awoke. When the creator of everything, the omniscient and omnipotent God, gazed upon this world, he was surrounded by numerous angels. Among them, the leaders of all angels, the angel kings closest to the divine throne, were 8 in number. The names of some of them have disappeared in the long history, while others still have some records, either brief or detailed. Legend has it that among these 8 angel kings were even the children of gods. Derek recounted the history he had learned by reading ancient texts during this time, and at the end, he honestly added, "Mr. Lover, this is all I know. However, after I return, I can find time to continue reading the ancient texts, there should be many more that I have missed." Ember nodded slightly, pondered for 2 seconds, and then instructed. "When you read the ancient texts, you can focus on the records concerning the giant queen Omibella, and where exactly that creator awoke from." Giant queen. Derek was stunned for a long while and couldn't help but ask, "How do you know the giant queen is named Omibella?" Ember looked at Derek's naive expression and casually explained, "That should be the god your Silver City once believed in. If you go back and search the ancient texts carefully, there should be corresponding records." Derek looked astonished and almost blurted out subconsciously, "Our Silver City has no records of this." The Hanged Man showed a thoughtful expression. Although the Sun claimed that the Silver City worshipped and believed in the creator of everything, he had never concealed that they had once believed in the giant King Olmir, and that the giant King Olmir had a profound influence on them. But regarding the giant Queen Omibella mentioned by Mr. Lover, not a single word was said. Perhaps this also involved some secrets or taboos. It was not strange for the Silver City to have some unknown secrets. For example, to the Storm Church, Pasu Island was their taboo. Because it was the location of their Storm Church headquarters, and also the location of the divine kingdom of the god they believed in, the Lord of Storms. But the question was, if the lover's words were not false, and the Silver City indeed once believed in the giant Queen Omibella, then why would they conceal this and instead claim that they once believed in the giant King Olmir? "Sorry, I lost my composure." Derek finally calmed down, took a deep breath and said, "I will consult the records of the Silver City, but the Silver City may not have many records in this regard." "No problem, just do your best." Ember nodded slightly. He was just asking casually with a try-it-out mentality, and didn't force it. After all, he already had the answer in his heart, and just hoped to find some written verification. "One more thing. Derek paused, then continued, "I hope to purchase the potion formula for Priest of Light." He has already become a Priest of Light, and the potion is being digested step by step. It will be completely digested in about a month. Therefore, he hopes to obtain the potion formula in advance, so that he can collect the corresponding extraordinary materials in advance and complete the promotion seamlessly after completing the potion digestion. While saying this, Derek's eyes were fixed on Ember. After all, most of the potion formulas for the members of the Tarot Club have been provided by Ember, so in Derek's eyes, Ember is the most likely person to help him obtain the potion formula. What a pity. Klein sighed softly in his heart. It was a pity that he didn't have the potion formula for the Priest of Light, otherwise he would have wanted to do this business as well. "I have it," the Hanged Man said without hesitation. "The price of a Sequence 7 potion formula is around £800, and the premium can even sell for more than £1,000. Give me £850, and I can show you the potion formula for the Priest of Light." Derek looked surprised, then said with some difficulty, "But I don't have gold pounds." Not only did he not have gold pounds, but he even owed Miss Justice a part of the gold pounds before. Fortunately, Miss Justice was looking for extraordinary materials for her family at that time, which allowed him to barely repay the debt. It's okay. The hanged man obviously expected this. Hampton said, you can repay with materials of equal value, but I don't know what I can get from you. First, list the common monsters and corresponding materials in the area around the Silver City, and I will choose from them. Well, I can show you the potion formula for the Priest of Light first. He had previously found the potion formula for the Priest of Light in the secret treasure vault of the Rothschild Islands diocese, but it was only recently that he found a good opportunity to consult it with a sufficiently legitimate reason and sufficient access. And with Mr. Fool as a guarantor, plus Little Son's noble, innocent, and pure, naive character, Alger was not afraid that Derek would take the potion formula and not pay, so it was better to do him a favor. No problem, I will do it as soon as possible, but it may have to wait until after the exploration is over. Derek was obviously relieved, and his tone also showed a hint of joy, as if he had taken a great advantage. The other members of the tarot club nearby just wanted to cover their faces. Little Son was too simple. Didn't he realize that this list itself was of extremely high value? Although they had realized this, no one took the initiative to expose the hanged man's scheme, because they actually wanted to know what common monsters and corresponding extraordinary materials were in the area around the Silver City. As for Little Son, well, he will learn from his mistakes, and this is for his own good. Exploration. The hanged man asked thoughtfully, have you been assigned an exploration mission again? Derek adjusted his sitting posture and said somewhat nervously, yes. Explore where? The hanged man, Alger noticed his abnormality and asked with his head tilted. Still that half-destroyed temple of the fallen creator. Derek replied with a nervous and solemn expression, however, Elder Lovia is still in the dungeon, and this exploration is led by the chief himself. The exploration team that went to that temple last time was almost completely wiped out, and only the team leader, Elder Lovia, the shepherd, was, fortunately, unharmed. But no one can guarantee that she is truly without abnormality, not even the 6-member council, otherwise Elder Lovia would not have been kept in the dungeon. The hanged man thought for a moment and suggested, this should be the final test for you before the monitoring is completely lifted. The information you transmitted before was that Aemon and the fallen creator are mortal enemies, and they would not hesitate to expose themselves to disrupt each other's plans. During this exploration of the fallen creator's temple, as long as you don't show any abnormalities, the 6-member council can basically conclude that you are no longer affected by Aemon. These events happened after Ember disappeared. The hanged man was afraid that Ember would not understand, so he explained. The last time the sun was possessed by Aemon, it was disguised as perishing together with the fallen creator. Mr. Sun. Ember tapped the table lightly with his fingers thoughtfully and slowly said, regarding your exploration this time, I have a request. What request? Theosin. Derek immediately sat up straight and said seriously, as long as it is within my ability, I will do my best to complete it. Ember shook his head and explained. It's just a matter of convenience. I hope that when you explore the temple, you will try your best to find the connection, or similarities, between the fallen creator and the Lord who created everything that you believe in. Theosin. Derek was stunned for a moment, then hesitated and nodded slightly. Okay. What does Mr. Lover mean by this? The hanged man was shocked, and a ripple rose in his heart. A terrifying and taboo guess began to sprout in his mind. The Silver City believes in the Lord who created everything, which is the creator. The reason why the East Continent, where the Silver City is located, became the land abandoned by God is because the creator abandoned them. But combined with the creation myth of the North Continent, it is known that the creator has already fallen. And among the mysterious organizations and secret sects led by the Aurora Order, they believe that the creator has not completely died, and his remaining core is the true creator. Some followers of the Aurora Order even tried to cross the Sonia Sea to go to the so-called sanctuary. This has also been confirmed by Mr. Lover. The so-called sanctuary is the East Continent, the land abandoned by God where the Sun and the Silver City are located. The 7 Orthodox gods that exist today have left their traces all over the North and South continents, but they have not left a single word in the records of the Silver City. But only the true creator, not only has followers preaching in the North and South continents, but also has temples remaining in the land abandoned by God. And Mr. Fool, when he first heard of the true creator, directly stated that he was the fallen creator. At first, Alger only heard Mr. Fool's level and equal attitude from this title, thus confirming that Mr. Fool is a true God-level existence. But he ignored the most obvious problem, whether it is the true creator or the fallen creator. the three words, creator, have always been the symbol of that ancient existence. This means that even Mr. Fool did not deny the other party's identity as the creator, he only denied the truth, and considered the other party a symbol of fall. And now, the lover is asking Thiessen, Derek to find the similarities between the fallen creator and the creator. And when Alger combined all these scattered clues, he found that they all revealed a terrifying truth. The fallen creator is the former creator. At least a part of the creator. Audrey suddenly had such a bold guess in her heart, which startled her so much that she didn't dare to think further. But Alger was even bolder than her. He even deduced a self-consistent logic. If the fallen creator was the former creator, then wasn't the East Continent, which was once protected by the creator, now the sanctuary of this fallen creator? The hanged man, Alger almost instinctively looked up at the fool, but could not read any meaning from his blurred eyes. But in a sense, no expression is the biggest clue. This means that Mr. Fool is likely silently agreeing with the lover's guess. What are you looking at me for? Klein was being watched by the hanged man and felt a little helpless. He could probably guess what Alger was thinking, because he was thinking the same thing in his mind right now. There was probably some connection between the creator and the fallen creator, and it was even likely a relationship of inheritance. And this just happens to be related to the previous information. The Storm Church and the Church of the Blazing Sun are hostile to each other, and the three great churches are also hostile to the Aurora Order at the same time, and conversely, the Aurora Order is also hostile to these three great churches at the same time. It is easy to understand if you substitute the gods they represent. The gods of the three great churches betrayed the Creator, and the fallen Creator is the remnant of the Creator, which is what created their mutual hostility. Klein knew very well that Ember's guess was not groundless. He must have already obtained some conclusive evidence in the land abandoned by God in the past, and he might even have met that creator. As for the meaning of him pursuing all this truth now, Klein's eyes twitched. He felt that Ember was probably thinking about how to drag the other party over and burn him. Although he was complaining wildly in his heart, he maintained a profound and unpredictable appearance on the surface, so that the hanged man did not dare to ask directly. Firstly, he didn't think he could pay enough, and secondly, the secrets involved were definitely not something he could interfere with. Knowing too much was not a good thing for him. Alger took a deep breath and forcibly changed the subject. I'll give you the potion formula first. Klein was also eager for Alger to change the subject. Upon hearing this, he immediately materialized paper and pen, and asked the hanged man, Alger, to write down the potion formula from memory and give it to Thiessen, Derek. At this point, this Tarot Club meeting successfully concluded. Chapter 148, Surprised. Unexpected. Suburbs of Beckland North District. After the afternoon Tarot Club meeting, Furs and Hugh took a carriage here. Not only was it Monday, the day of the Tarot Club, but it was also the night of the full moon, and the members of the Abraham family needed to receive treatment on this day as well. The carriage drove directly into a vast manor and stopped outside the main house along with dozens of other carriages. Then, she and Furs each led a petite and cute loli into the main house. Miss Furs. As soon as she stepped through the gate, Dorian Gray came forward with a smile on his face. He glanced around and asked hesitantly, hasn't Mr. Aishu returned yet? Furs saw through Dorian's thoughts and smiled faintly. He's back, but he doesn't want to be bothered by these trivial matters, so the treatment will still be carried out by me. Not only the treatment, but also the subsequent liaison with the Abraham family was her responsibility. However, Furs did not state it explicitly, as she believed Dorian could understand her unspoken meaning. Is that so? A clear look of disappointment showed in Dorian's eyes, and he said with a bitter smile, perhaps for him, these are indeed just trivial matters. Furs appropriately showed a slightly displeased expression, seemingly because she saw through Dorian's thoughts. Although Furs had proven that she also had the ability to treat, Ember was clearly more trustworthy in the other party's eyes compared to Furs, this beginner. Of course, in Furs's view, there was actually a more convenient method of treatment, which was to pray for the blessing of Mr. Fool. Compared to the method of having to gather together to use healing tears, praying to the Fool had no additional conditions. They could pray anytime, anywhere, and wouldn't need to specially rush to Beckland. And perhaps this was the true meaning of the prophecy made by the Abraham family back then, only fire and the Fool can save Abraham. However, neither Furs nor Hugh would inform Abraham of this matter. After all, they also had their own selfish motives. Dorian naturally didn't know what Furs was thinking. He just asked hesitantly, Miss Furs, how many more times can your healing ability be used? More than 10 times. Furs asked calmly, even if it's used up, I can record it again. Is there a problem? Dorian was silent for a long time, then said slowly but firmly. I hope to take this opportunity to attempt to advance to sequence 6 recorder. Have you completely digested your potion? Furs asked subconsciously. Yes. Dorian smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly. It's not just me, many family members have already completed the digestion of their potion. After all, we have stayed at sequence 7 for too long. Furs's eyes held a strange look. She wasn't really surprised by this result. After all, for the Abraham family, who possessed the complete apprentice pathway and the acting method, potion digestion was not the end. The biggest obstacle restricting their advancement was the curse originating from their bloodline. It should be known that even for ordinary extraordinary, the higher the sequence, the correspondingly greater the risk of losing control. And for Abraham, who were tormented by the curse, their risk was even far greater than that of ordinary extraordinary. Because it wasn't just the full moon, when they attempted to raise their extraordinary sequence, whispers would descend simultaneously, and the madness of the whispers was far higher than during the full moon. At the low sequence, it was fine. Abraham could rely on their strong willpower, along with the help of some magical items, to endure the whispers time and time again. But once they attempted to advance to sequence 6, which was truly the threshold of the middle sequence, the horror of the whispers they suffered would increase exponentially. And this also led to the fact that for thousands of years, the Abraham family had never produced a single middle sequence extraordinary in the true sense. Even elder council members like Dorian were at most sequence 7, because those extraordinary who attempted to advance to sequence 6 had long since lost control amidst the whispers. And the reason he was willing to attempt to advance now was because Furs possessed healing tears, which could treat whispers. This ability might be able to help him during advancement, allowing him to get through the most difficult part of the curse. Furs was not surprised by this, because it could be seen from the inheritance of the Abraham family. Even though they carried the curse, the Abraham family had never been content with mediocrity for thousands of years. Even if they split into small families and scattered across the world, most of them did not abandon their inheritance. Otherwise, they would not have maintained such a terrifying scale of hundreds of extraordinary despite carrying the curse. They didn't attempt to advance before because they knew that advancement was certain death. But now Abraham had a chance to fight for it, and they naturally wouldn't let it go. The only problem was that this opportunity was not in their hands. Because the person who possessed the ability to treat whispers was Ember, and besides him, there was only Furs, who possessed Lemonoo's travel notes and could record these abilities. Furs was silent for a long time, then suddenly asked, "You should still have other magical items made from recorder extraordinary characteristics, right?" There was no reason for the Abraham family, who could casually give away magical items like Lemonoo's travel notes, not to have other extraordinary items of the same type. Yes. Dorian nodded and said honestly, there are at least 5 other magical items of the same type, but I can guarantee that no Abraham attempted to secretly record this ability during the last treatment. What's the use of just saying it? Even if you secretly record it, I wouldn't be able to know. Furs muttered softly in her heart. Of course, Furs was just complaining inwardly. She knew there was no need for Dorian to lie to her, as the initiative was in her hands. Because if members of the Abraham family secretly used similar extraordinary items to record healing tears, Furs could completely use this as a reason to refuse further treatment. And even if Abraham successfully recorded healing tears, it couldn't be maintained for long. Because each recording was an iteration, and the effect of each iteration was only 80% of the previous iteration. This meant that the effect of the recorded, healing tears, would only get worse and worse, not to mention that the success rate of this iteration was not 100%. With repeated iterations leading to recording failures and effect attenuation, it wouldn't be long before the Abraham family lost the ability to heal. At that time, they would still have to turn back to seek help from Furs and Ember. And once there was a precedent of betrayal, the difficulty of getting help again was imaginable. The principle that Furs could understand, the members of the Abraham family couldn't possibly not understand. Instead of secretly recording the ability at the risk of falling out, it was better to be honest. That was why Dorian appeared here, actively revealing his intention to advance to Furs, seeking her help. Of course, this was also a test, testing Furs's attitude towards their advancement. Okay. Furs nodded slightly and said frankly, but let me state beforehand, I am only responsible for using the ability, and not responsible for anything else. Because I am not sure if healing tears can completely eliminate the whispers heard during advancement, so Mr. Dorian, you have to weigh the risk of advancement yourself. Thank you for your help, Ms. Furs. Dorian chuckled softly. His voice was not loud, but his eyes were exceptionally firm, and he said gently, as for the risk, it's unavoidable, but I am prepared. Every one of us is prepared to sacrifice for the family. If something happens to me, Vaildu will take my place and liaise with you on behalf of the Abraham family. Furs nodded silently, then seemed to suddenly remember something and reminded him. That Mr. X I mentioned to you before, do you have any leads? Dorian was silent for 2 seconds. The expression on his face, which had originally been somewhat relaxed and at ease, suddenly became solemn, and he said in a deep voice. According to the portrait Ms. Furs provided, we can basically confirm that this is one of those who betrayed Abraham and joined the Aurora Order back then. Combined with their strength when they defected, this Mr. X is very likely my student, Louis Wien. This person is very dangerous. If you encounter him next time, remember to avoid him in advance. How dangerous? Hugh asked back. As an arbitrator of Sequence 7, she could effortlessly remember anyone's appearance and image and accurately restore them. It was based on the portrait of Mr. X she provided that the Abraham determined the other party's identity. Although the other party wore a mask during the gathering, their figure and height could not be concealed. After all, he was not a faceless. Dorian glanced at the short lady and instructed. When he betrayed us, he was already a recorder, and now he might even have become a traveler. You should already be clear about the abilities of the Apprentice Pathways Traveler and Recorder. Many times, he is even harder to deal with than some demigods. Hugh and Furs exchanged a glance, immediately understanding. A recorder can record a demigod's full power strike, while a traveler can grant the ability of rapid movement that most demigods cannot achieve. When facing demigods of certain pathways, a Sequence 5 traveler can easily escape, and there's even a possibility of fighting back and killing them. Of course, it's just a possibility. After all, the abilities of every demigod are very powerful. Even if they are not as flexible as a traveler, they cannot be easily counter-killed. While speaking, they also arrived at the gathering hall under Dorian's lead. Hundreds of extraordinary from the Abraham family gathered together, and unlike the apprehension and nervousness they felt at the villa outside Pritz Harbor before, the Abraham who had already undergone one treatment were full of confidence in this treatment, so the corresponding atmosphere was also much better. They gathered in groups of 3 or 5, sitting or standing and discussing various matters. Some took pastries and fruits from the buffet table with plates, while those hoping to briefly escape the noise entered the balconies attached to the hall, overlooking the garden scenery and the twilight sky. As for the impending red moon and curse, they were not worried, because the Abraham already had a method to counter the curse. Furs dotingly rubbed the little Loli's head beside her and asked with concern. Cholera, do you want to eat something? The little Loli, like a pink jade carving, lifted her small face and whispered, ice cream. Furs hesitated for a moment and looked at the table. Although there were various exquisite pastries on it, there was no ice cream. After all, it was already December, winter. Even if the temperature in Backland rarely dropped below 0, it could not be called warm at all, and probably no chef would think that someone would want to eat ice cream in winter. I'll immediately tell the chef. Just as Dorian was about to speak upon hearing this, a young girl nearby who also heard the request's eyes lit up, and she immediately said, I can make ice cream, there are ingredients in the kitchen, I can start now, but I need 2 trick masters to help. Me. I'll do it. I was promoted to Sequence 8 a long time ago, and I'm more skilled at using spells than you. Come on, who doesn't know how to make ice? You talk as if it requires a lot of proficiency. The young men and women nearby immediately had their eyes light up, and one after another, they eagerly raised their hands. In the end, 3 lucky people were chosen by the young girl and followed her into the kitchen. As for the use, although trick masters have little combat power, one of their abilities is to rapidly cool and freeze water. Although winter is already cold, it is clearly unrealistic to make ice cream on the spot relying solely on the weather. And the abilities of a trick master, while not very useful if directly used in combat, are quite interesting in daily life. Dorian withdrew what he was about to say and half-jokingly said. I think the ice cream should be ready soon, but what I'm more curious about is, what's the relationship between these 2 girls and you? They couldn't be your daughters, could they? Daughters are definitely impossible. After all, these 2 are only in their early 20s, how could they have a pair of 11 or 12-year-old daughters? They are nannies, no, bodyguards, Furs said seriously. Oh. Dorian nodded understandingly, probably guessing that one of their relatives was unable to take care of the children and entrusted them to their care. Hugh took 2 exquisite pastries with a plate, and while feeding Curlis, she reminded. You weren't followed when you came, were you? The reason Mr. X appeared in Backland was that he detected a large gathering of Abraham family members in Backland. Hugh and Furs could guarantee that they did not leave any trace, but the members of the Abraham family might not be able to be so thorough. For example, Dorian, that Mr. X is his apprentice. With just one encounter, Mr. X could probably recognize Dorian and then follow him all the way to this manor. And there were a full 100 people from the Abraham family, and all these 100 people could potentially be followed. No, Dorian answered in a relatively relaxed tone. Many of our members arrived in Backland a month ago, and most of them moved directly into this manor after arriving. The procurement of food and supplies is done by hired servants. And after receiving your reminder, I also promptly reminded others to avoid going out as much as possible and not to use their abilities. Since those traitors joined the Aurora Order, we often play hide and seek with them and are quite skilled in dealing with the Aurora Order. Moreover, Dorian paused, put away his smile, and said in a deep voice, this situation won't last too long. As long as he can successfully advance to Sequence 6, it means the Abraham can temporarily ignore the curse and continue to advance. There are quite a few members in the family who, like him, have stayed at Sequence 7 for a long time, which means the family can have multiple Sequence 6 extraordinary within a short period. And once they become a Sequence 6 recorder, the extraordinary of the apprentice pathway can truly possess combat power. Furthermore, with the magical items held by the family, the Sequence 6 recorder can also possess far richer extraordinary abilities than other extraordinary. And as long as they can successfully advance to Sequence 6 extraordinary, then as time goes on, Sequence 5 and even Sequence 4 will no longer be a luxury. Among the extraordinary who betrayed Abraham, the strongest is still only Sequence 4 because they did not master the potion formula for the apprentice pathway's Sequence 3. This also means that as long as Abraham can have their own demigod, they will no longer have to hide like this. With a demigod, they will have the ability to contend with the Aurora Order and even have the chance to reclaim the lost sealed artifacts from those traitors. Perhaps one day, they can truly make Abraham great again. Oh, is that so? A playful voice suddenly sounded in the living room, instantly making everyone in the hall tense up, subconsciously looking towards the direction of the sound. On the balcony facing the twilight, a figure stood there at some point. He was of medium height, with darker skin, about 1.75 meters tall, wearing a black classical robe and a pointed rural mage hat. On his face was a mask that seemed cast from brass, giving him an ancient and mysterious aura. Dorian's body instantly stiffened, and his back felt cold. Although the mask obscured his view of the man's appearance, he recognized the man in front of him in the first 4 years, Louis Wien. In the betrayal launched by the apprentice against Abraham many years ago, this student, who was once his most proud, was one of the masterminds. Dorian's expression became a little stiff and bitter. He had just sworn in front of the two ladies that he would not be followed. As a result, the other party had already followed him to his doorstep, which was undoubtedly a blatant slap in the face. He didn't care about his old face, but how could the other party follow him all the way here just to slap his face? For so many years, these traitors have never forgotten to search for the traces of the Abraham family, isn't it just to wipe out the Abraham? Louis Wien's mouth curved slightly upward. He adjusted his hat and walked towards the hall like a gentleman strolling leisurely, even smiling and waving at Dorian. Teacher Dorian, it's been a long time since we last met. I've missed you dearly. How have you been? Chapter 149. Allied forces in distress, immobile as a mountain. Louis Wien. Dorian's heart sank. He really wanted to know how the other party had found them, but he also knew that asking now was meaningless. Moreover, since the other party intended to capture all the Abraham, it was impossible for him to come alone. The entire manor was probably surrounded by extraordinary of the Aurora Order at this moment. And among them, there might even be saints at the Sequence 4 level. If the Abraham had their own Sequence 6, they might still have a chance to fight. But the reality was that due to the long-term curse, the highest Sequence extraordinary among them was only Sequence 7. And extraordinary of the door pathway had almost no combat ability before reaching recorder. Although the family still possessed many magical items, but how did you find this place? Dorian was still trying to figure out a countermeasure when a slightly curious voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Looking over, he saw that Ms. Furs was looking at Louis Wien, who was wearing a mask, with a curious expression. And it was this glance that caused Dorian's expression to change slightly. Louis Wien obviously didn't expect anyone to ask such a stupid question, and said leisurely. Don't you know that the extraordinary characteristics of the same pathway attract each other? If you were still scattered across the world as before, I might not have found you so easily. But you foolishly chose to gather together, and Louis Wien looked up at the sky outside the window, the corner of his mouth slightly raised. You even specifically chose the night of the full moon. Does this mean you have found a way to break the curse? Extraordinary characteristics aggregation law. Furs suddenly realized, showing an expression of, so that's it, on her face, seemingly accepting this explanation. Louis Wien walked leisurely to the dining table, picked up a pastry, brought it to his mouth, and took a bite, nodding slightly. It tastes pretty good. The Abraham family's pastry skills are the only thing worth praising. Teacher Dorian, how about the Abraham family focuses on making pastries for us from now on? Louis Wien glanced around the crowd and chuckled. This way, I might even spare some of you and allow the Abraham bloodline to continue. Dorian angrily rebuked. Wishful thinking. You think. Bang. Before he could finish speaking, a loud gunshot instantly broke the silence in the hall. Many people looked over in surprise, following the sound of the gun to find a dark muzzle hidden in the crowd. It was a young member of the Abraham family who had pulled the trigger behind Louis Wien while he was distracted. However, even facing a bullet coming from behind that he couldn't see, Louis Wien had already discovered it early on. Before the trigger was pulled, Louis Wien's figure had already disappeared from the spot. The bullet passed through the illusion left by Louis Wien, shattering a high-footed glass filled with red wine on the table with a snap. Amidst the scattered glass fragments and splashing wine, Louis Wien appeared several meters away, still as leisurely as before, as if he hadn't been aimed at just now. Louis Wien shook his head, looking extremely disappointed, and sighed. Teacher Dorian, the young people of the Abraham family are becoming more and more impolite. Can't you just wait patiently for me to finish speaking? Do you have to force me to act early? Is this good? This is not good. Whoosh. As he spoke, the Abraham raised their weapons one after another, pointing their pistols at Louis Wien's location. The Abraham were not fools. They certainly knew they lacked offensive means before Sequence 6, but this did not mean they would give up resisting. While extraordinary abilities lacked offensive means, pistols could make up for this, because even mid-sequence extraordinary would die if hit in a vital spot. But even when being aimed at by dozens of pistols, Louis Wien remained calm and unhurried, instead looking like he was watching an idiot, mocking. Did the curse burn out your brains? Do you really think a gun would be useful against me? How do you know if you don't try? Dorian said in a low voice, slowly raising his right hand and drawing his brass-colored revolver. Of course, he knew that his proud student was now a Sequence 5 traveler. He could teleport and blink, and might even have recorded extraordinary abilities at the Sequence 4 demigod level. The threat of a pistol to him was infinitely close to zero. But they had to try. What if they hit him? Naive. Louis Wien sneered, and then he couldn't laugh anymore. Because his peripheral vision caught sight of a 1.5-meter tall girl, and beside that 1.5-meter tall girl, an even smaller, seemingly delicate and lovely little loli suddenly raised her right hand, wearing a golden wristband on her fair wrist. Louis Wien's expression changed slightly, and his spirituality frantically warned him. This drove his body to subconsciously use teleportation. His figure suddenly became transparent, becoming less real. But in the next second, he heard the clear and pleasant voice of the little loli. Teleportation is forbidden here. Silently, some unknown change occurred in the manner covered by the night. Louis Wien, whose body was quickly fading, reappeared from the void. He failed to change his position successfully. Shoot! At Dorian's shout, the Abraham reacted almost instantly, pointing their dark muzzles at Louis Wien and pulling the triggers at the same time. However, Louis Wien, who found that his teleportation had failed, also reacted immediately. A transparent and blurry book condensed in front of him, and a distant and ethereal chant echoed in his ears. I came, I saw, I recorded. The book flipped open with a whoosh, stopping on one of the pages. Dawn Armor. This was an extraordinary ability from the Warrior Pathway's Sequence 6, Dawn Knight. Although the Warrior Pathway was almost the most clumsy and least flexible pathway among extraordinary, in terms of physical aspects, whether it was attack power or defense, they were undoubtedly the first. Bang 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 bang. Amidst the dense gunfire, a dense metal storm of yellow-orange bullets attacked Louis Wien, who had lost his teleportation ability. But at the same time, a silver-white armor covering his entire body had condensed on Louis Wien's body, including gauntlets, breastplate, and crowned helmet, among others. Bullet after bullet continuously hit Louis Wien, but they were blocked by the dawn armor covering his entire body with clanging sounds, failing to injure his flesh in the slightest. Anger grew in Louis Wien's heart, but before his full-blown rage could escape, his peripheral vision once again caught sight of his target. It was the 1.5-meter-tall girl. She was using the opportunity of being focused on to put on an iron-black wristguard on her right hand. Then, Louis Wien saw her raise her right hand, and a clear sound also came from his ear. It was an ancient Hermes word. Imprison. Suddenly, the surroundings of Louis Wien seemed to become incredibly viscous, as if forming a giant amber, or enclosing a sealed transparent wall, firmly imprisoning him within, unable to move. Louis Wien, who had been confident of victory, instantly became terrified. He almost subconsciously wanted to flip through his book to find a way to deal with it. But in the next second, he seemed to hear a clear sound again, like the crisp sound of a mirror being broken. And that sound was so close, as if it came from his own body. Before he could figure out what was going on, he felt a pain in his chest. Louis Wien subconsciously lowered his head and saw a bright knife tip piercing his chest. Only then did he realize that the shattering sound just now seemed to be his dawn armor. This backstab completely interrupted Louis Wien's train of thought, sealing the countermeasures he had planned in his mind. He turned his head with difficulty, only to see a familiar small figure, exactly the same as the little lowly wearing the golden watch who had forbidden him from teleporting, both having delicate features and bright silver long hair. The only difference was that this little lowly was holding a long sword and stabbing it into his body, while the other was wearing a watch. And during this process, he seemed to still hear the solemn but clear voice from his ear. Illegal intrusion into another's residence is a crime. Illegal intrusion into another's residence is a crime. Illegal intrusion into another's residence is a crime. Hugh raised her palm and declared solemnly, repeating it 3 times, looking at Louis Wien in front of her with cold eyes, and said with pressure, "The guilty shall be restricted." Louis Wien, who was already imprisoned by the viscous air, didn't catch his breath and felt his body sink, as if invisible shackles were placed on his hands and feet, and even his thoughts became incredibly stiff. This undoubtedly made Louis Wien's situation, which had already suffered heavy damage, even worse, making him feel extremely aggrieved. "You were already unable to move, and you still ambushed me, and after the ambush, you put another layer of shackles on me, as if you were afraid of me making a last-ditch effort." Although this was indeed the case, now that teleportation was forbidden and even his thoughts had become stiff, Louis Wien could barely even summon the book to use his abilities. And in his last moments of consciousness, he seemed to hear a solemn judgment from his ear. Death. At the same time as the 1.5-meter-tall Hugh made the solemn declaration, with the assistance of the iron black glove, her body immediately merged with a peculiar force, trailing a clear afterimage, and crashed into Louis Wien. The fist formed by her right hand wearing the iron black wristguard, in Louis Wien's terrified eyes, got closer and closer. Crack. The expected sound of fist hitting flesh did not appear. Instead, there was a clear shattering sound like a watermelon being dropped on the ground. Louis Wien's mask shattered instantly, and his head followed suit, exploding like fireworks in an instant, turning into blood and flesh fragments of various shapes and splashing in all directions. When everything subsided, accompanied by a strong smell of blood, Louis Wien's headless corpse lost all restraints and finally fell freely to the ground, in the pool of blood stained by his own blood. This Sequence 5 traveler, an extraordinary who could easily escape even a demigod, didn't even have time to use the demigod-level extraordinary abilities he had recorded. He died so ignominiously in the hall. But until the last moment, his heart was filled with grievance and resentment. The grievance was because the other party didn't play fair and suddenly ambushed him, not even giving him a chance to use his abilities. Especially the silver-haired twin Lawless who forbade teleportation and unknowingly came behind him to deliver the fatal blow. If it weren't for them, he could have teleported away at the beginning, and the layer of dawn armor could have helped him block this fatal blow. As for the resentment, it was not directed at the members of the Abraham family, because he had not expected them to be able to kill him. He resented his reinforcements, his allies, who never appeared until he died. Meanwhile, in a living room in the manor, Mr. A, whom Mr. X regarded as an ally and savior, was leisurely drinking red wine and betraying Mr. X's plan to the man in front of him without reservation. Mr. X belongs to the Saint of Mysteries. The extraordinary of the apprentice pathway who defected from the Abraham family back then all belong to the Saint of Mysteries. But their area of responsibility is not in Backland. Backland has always been the responsibility of the Dark Saint. Even the Saint of Mysteries cannot come to Backland without permission. So Mr. X tried to seek our help, in exchange for a share of the Abraham family's inheritance, to assist him in encircling and suppressing the Abraham family. But as you can see, I was just a bystander from beginning to end and didn't make a move. Mr. A said as he spread his hands to show his innocence. Ember glanced at Mr. A and asked slowly, "You're not interested in the sealed artifact held by the Abraham family?" "Of course I am interested," Mr. A admitted frankly, "but to the Lord, none of these are important." "Because the Lord doesn't care." Mr. A spread his hands, assuming a posture as if embracing the sun, his face full of piety and fanaticism. Ember looked at the pious and fanatical believer in front of him and said slowly, "You may leave." Of course. Mr. A stood up, the corner of his mouth slightly raised, placing his right hand in front of him and bowing elegantly. He didn't ask about Mr. X's fate, because he had heard the commotion outside, and even more so because he didn't care. Although Mr. X was also a believer of the Lord, compared to Ember, whom the Lord had personally instructed him to take care of, Mr. X was completely insignificant. Even the Saint of Mysteries behind him was no different in the Lord's eyes. So, Mr. A paused and asked considerately. Mr. X's death will definitely stimulate the Saint of Mysteries. He might personally rush to Backland. Do you want me to help collect intelligence on him? It's not impossible. Ember thought for a moment and nodded slightly. Mr. A smiled, not surprised by Ember's answer, and had no hesitation in betraying the Saint of Mysteries. Although everyone was a believer of the Lord, this did not mean that the saints had to get along harmoniously and benefit each other. Compared to them, who were true believers of the true Creator through the seer pathway, the group of the Saint of Mysteries who betrayed the Abraham family were clearly another small group. Especially with the Lord's instructions, Mr. A had even less psychological burden in betraying the Saint of Mysteries. After all, who cares? Chapter 150, Why a Miracle is a Miracle. In a manner covering a vast area on the outskirts of the North District. Mr. Dorian looked at the middle-aged man who had returned from scouting outside the manor and asked in a deep voice. Veildu, how are things outside? Veildu, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and resembling a university professor, shook his head and said, There's no one from the Aurora Order, and no ambush. No. How is that possible? A look of surprise appeared on Mr. Dorian's face, somewhat disbelieving. Since Louis Ween dared to raid the Abraham family's manor, he definitely wouldn't have come alone. Even if he acted recklessly relying on his ability to teleport, they had sought the Aurora Order as external aid when they betrayed Abraham before, so it was impossible for him not to inform the Aurora Order this time. Therefore, even after dealing with Louis Ween, Mr. Dorian didn't dare to relax at all, because he firmly believed that the outside must be surrounded by Beyonders from the Aurora Order. But now Veildu told him there was nothing. How could this be? Could it be that Louis Ween was truly so arrogant that he believed he could deal with everyone by himself? How could he? Even if he was a Sequence 5, it wouldn't be that easy to wipe out the Abraham, or could it be that he was really this arrogant? No, it shouldn't be that simple. Mr. Dorian felt he was quite familiar with this most outstanding disciple of his. Even if Louis Wien's mind had issues because he joined the Aurora Order, he was definitely not a fool. He knew very well that even if Abraham didn't have a single Sequence 6, they possessed more than one powerful sealed artifact, enough to contend with a Sequence 5 Beyonder. It was impossible not to seek support from the Aurora Order. Mr. Dorian suddenly had a guess and subconsciously cast his gaze towards the side of the dining table. There, Furs was feeding ice cream to a little loli named Cholera beside her. And just now, that seemingly petite twin loli played a crucial role in the process of killing Louis Ween. One sealed off Louis Wien's possibility of escape, and the other also used unknown means to become invisible and circle behind Louis, delivering a fatal backstab. He originally thought Furs was acting as a bodyguard for these two twins, but now he realized it was completely the other way around. Louis Ween was not a fool, and a Sequence 5 was definitely not weak, yet he died here, so where were the reinforcements from the Aurora Order he invited? Mr. Dorian turned his gaze back to Veildu, and seeing him looking at Furs and the others with surprise and doubt, he knew that Veildu had likely also guessed the reason. It wasn't that Louis didn't seek help from the Aurora Order, but that those he brought had likely already been dealt with. Mr. Dorian took a deep breath, feeling both lingering fear and a sense of rejoice. His lingering fear was that this crisis had almost caused the Abraham family to suffer another heavy blow, and his sense of rejoice was that the Abraham family had made the most correct decision in history. The prophecy exchanged with the ancestors' lives was incredibly precious. Defecting, or rather, seeking the help of Flame, was the only way to save Abraham. Amidst his excitement, Mr. Dorian didn't forget the main business. The most urgent task now was to comfort the other family members to prevent chaos. However, he was temporarily unable to leave. Veildu. Mr. Dorian thought for a moment, looked at Veildu wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and called out. Veildu immediately understood, nodded almost imperceptibly, and turned to announce to the other Abraham that the crisis had been lifted. Mr. Dorian took a deep breath and walked towards Furs and the others, asking with a smile. Miss Furs, does the ice cream suit your taste? It tastes very good. Furs praised it, but quickly whispered with some regret, unfortunately, it's too cold, eating too much makes your head feel weird. The taste was very good, but eating ice cream in winter really does make your head feel weird. That feeling of coldness rising undoubtedly made one shiver all over. Cholera was essentially still a soul body, and even though she had clearly eaten a lot, she was still fine as if nothing had happened. But Furs couldn't, even if she was greedy, she could only occasionally lick it. That's good. Mr. Dorian seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but his expression quickly turned serious again, and he asked in a low voice, "The location of this manor has been exposed. I suggest moving as soon as possible after completing the treatment, and choosing other gathering locations next time. Does Miss Furs have any suggestions?" Regarding this aspect, Furs thought for a moment and asked, "Mr. Dorian, you said before that the Abraham family has at least 5 mystical items similar to Lemonoo's travel notes, right?" "Yes." Mr. Dorian was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. "We still have many similar magic books. Did you bring them?" Furs continued to ask. Mr. Dorian was stunned for a moment, not quite reacting. "It's like this," Furs explained, "it's too dangerous for everyone to gather together, it's easy to be wiped out like today, and it's also inconvenient for them to travel from various places. So, if you have other magic books, you can completely record healing tears yourselves. That way, the gathering location is no longer limited to one place, which is also safer, isn't it?" Mr. Dorian was speechless for a long while. That was the logic, but this way the initiative would not be entirely in the other party's hands, and to put it more seriously, there was suspicion of breaking ties. And to avoid this, Mr. Dorian had always restrained the members of the Abraham family, forbidding them from secretly recording healing tears in private. But now Furs actually took the initiative to propose letting them record it, which truly exceeded Mr. Dorian's expectations. Mr. Dorian took a deep breath and quickly said, "I'll go inform them now." He didn't pretend or decline, because this was indeed what he hoped for, not to mention it was proposed by the other party. Moreover, ultimately, this situation could not completely free the Abraham family from the curse. After all, as the recording iterated, the effect would also weaken repeatedly. Even the healing tears recorded by Furs were not first-hand, and to fully recover, they ultimately still had to rely on Ember. Soon, the Abraham were summoned again. The lifting of the crisis allowed them to relax slightly, but the approaching full moon made their spirits tense again. Finally, the red moon emerged from the clouds, its light pure and bright, perfectly round. It shone brightly into the hall through the balconies, some open and some closed. But in this brilliant and pure light, the only thing that greeted the Abraham was painful murmurs. Fortunately, Furs had already grasped the knack. While supporting Lemonoo's travel notes, with her palm to prevent it from closing, she used her finger to slide across the smooth white paper on the corresponding page, allowing the strange patterns and symbols filled with mystery and ancient flavor to be directly presented in her mind through touch. Spirituality was then infused, and a white-gold circular magic array like a moonwheel appeared at her feet. Centered around her, it spread outwards in ripples, and the murmurs that came with the full moon also vanished into nothingness. After doing all this, Furs breathed a sigh of relief and looked at the few members of the Abraham family beside her. They were all elders of Abraham, and 2 of them were Vaildu and Mr. Dorian. They each held different styles of Beander items, but without exception, they were all made from the Beander characteristic of a sequence 6 feet scribe. And their only purpose was to record the healing tears she had just cast as much as possible. However, when everything ended, when Furs looked over, they could only look at each other in dismay. "Did you succeed?" Mr. Dorian's voice was somewhat strained. "Failed." Vaildu's face showed bitterness, and when he looked at the others, they were all the same. A full 5 mystical items made from scribe, Beander characteristics, yet all their recordings ended in failure without exception. Is this really a Beander ability below sequence 7? Vaildu couldn't help but ask. The healing tears, recorded on Lemonoo's travel notes, were on white paper, corresponding to Beander abilities from sequence 9 to sequence 7. Logically, the success rate for recording such low sequence Beander abilities should be at least above 80%. They had a total of 5 mystical items of the same type here, so based on the proportion, they should have been able to record successfully at least 4 times. Even if they had bad luck, 3 times, 2 times, or even just once would have been fine. But now they hadn't succeeded even once. Wasn't this success rate too low? Furs heard Mr. Dorian and their conversation and understood what was going on, and silently thought in her heart. This might be related to the essence of this ability. Ember once said that healing tears is not a Beander's Beander ability, but something called miracle. Furs doesn't know what a miracle is, but she knows that if a miracle were so easy to replicate, it wouldn't be called a miracle. Although healing tears only needs to occupy the white paper representing a low sequence, it doesn't mean its own rank is only sequence 7. Similarly, Ember's records are accurate, but this doesn't prove anything. For example, Ember recording sequence 5 teleportation was also a success, but this doesn't mean others have this ability. There's still a chance. Dorian said in a deep voice, "I'll go to the basement later for the advancement." You take the opportunity to record it again. All right. Veildu nodded silently. Although there was indeed another chance, he felt that this time wouldn't succeed either. Dorian had already prepared for the advancement, but not in the main hall. Instead, it was in the basement of the manor. This was preparation for failure. If he lost control during the advancement, the Abraham had to be ready to kill the out-of-control Dorian in the basement to prevent him from escaping and harming others. Dorian walked into the basement with a calm expression, skillfully and calmly beginning to concoct the scribe potion. Just like the Abraham who bore immense psychological pressure and were ready to kill him at any moment, Dorian was also prepared to lose control and be killed. Furs stood at the entrance of the basement. Her only responsibility was to use healing tears when Dorian advanced. The rest was none of her business, nor was it something she should consider. Dorian finished concocting the potion. Under the gaze of the others, he took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and drank the potion in his hand. The moment the potion entered his mouth, Dorian felt the abnormality in his body. His brain felt like it was about to explode, rapidly expanding, with gray folds and protrusions growing madly. But for Dorian, these were not the hardest parts. The hardest part was the sudden ravings that echoed in his mind. The terrifying ravings continuously stimulated his body, causing every cell of his flesh to proliferate and spread wildly, as if to turn his entire being into a disgusting mass of flesh. Almost in the blink of an eye, his consciousness was swallowed by the ravings. He had considered that he might fail the advancement, but he never expected to be drowned in endless ravings from the very beginning, losing even the ability to think. The muscles of his face immediately contorted, revealing a painful expression. Suddenly, he let out a scream, fell to the ground, constantly struggling, constantly clutching his neck, emitting thick roars like a monster. He had only just drunk the potion a second ago, but he was already on the verge of losing control. Furs quickly flipped to the page corresponding to healing tears in Lemonu's travel notes. A white-gold circular magic array, like a lunar disk, rapidly expanded, instantly enveloping Dorian's body. But to everyone's surprise, it didn't work as expected. No, it should be said that it still had an effect. At least the ravings in Dorian's mind disappeared, but his spirit and consciousness had already been polluted by the ravings, and his flesh had undergone terrifying changes due to the ravings. In just 1 second, he had torn off his clothes, shed his skin, and turned into a bloody monster. And these physical abnormalities would not disappear with the vanishing of the ravings. On the surface of his expanding flesh, countless proliferating flesh buds were still waving outwards, swaying in the wind like flower branches. But Dorian's body was restraining them, preventing them from detaching, pulling back and forth between expansion and contraction. Anyone could see that in the next second, this flesh would explode like a dandelion, with a bang, splashing everywhere. A trace of pain and struggle appeared in Veildu's eyes, but these complex emotions instantly turned into determination. He had to end Dorian's suffering while he was still a person, or at least looked like one. Wait! Fine beads of sweat appeared on Furz's forehead. Seeing signs of others taking action, she immediately shouted to stop the Abraham. And the copy of Lemonu's travel notes in her hand quickly flipped to another page. Sunlight healing. Open black lens bracket saints who serve the Sunlight Princess. A miracle specially taught. Can greatly restore health over a wide area, including people nearby. Gavivia, beloved by all creation. Bestowed the grace of miracles upon many warrior. Close black lens bracket. Golden light continuously condensed in the girl's hand, finally blooming with a ping sound, transforming into a warm and gentle golden magic array like rising sunlight, instantly covering the entire basement. At that moment, everyone within it felt healed, both in body and spirit. But Furs didn't concern herself with the subsequent situation. She just took a deep breath and directly used teleportation to leave the basement. She had done what she was supposed to do, and whatever happened next was no longer her concern. But what she didn't know was that shortly after she left, the wildly proliferating flesh buds on the surface of Dorian, who had originally expanded into a bloody monster, also began to quickly detach like dead skin, instantly condensing into a thick layer of meat paste on the ground. However, with the peeling off of this layer of meat paste, Dorian's body gradually returned to normal. The expression on his face still remained contorted from pain, but his originally old and rough skin had become incredibly fine and tender, like a newborn baby. Lying in a pool of blood, he seemed completely out of place with the still wriggling layer of meat paste, making it impossible to tell that it had been a part of his body just a second ago. Veildu's mouth fell open, completely unprepared for such a reversal. But no matter what, at least for now, they shouldn't need to take action against Dorian anymore. As he was thinking, Dorian also finally woke up. At this moment, he looked bewildered, only feeling sticky all over, as if countless tentacles were stroking his skin, making him incredibly sensitive. When he reacted, he found himself lying in a wriggling mass of flesh. He was instantly startled and scrambled up from the ground, jumping far away. "Dorian, how do you feel?" Veildu asked in a deep voice. "Very good." Hearing this, Dorian felt his body, and an expression of joy appeared on his face. He said excitedly, "I succeeded. I successfully advanced to Sequence 6 Scribe." Veildu immediately breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at the others and quickly asked, "Did any of you successfully record the 2 Beander abilities Miss Furs used just now?" "I didn't, not a single one." "Me neither." The Abraham looked at each other, their expressions somewhat awkward, because they hadn't recorded anything again, just like before. This couldn't help but make them doubt life a little. Everyone was using a mystical item, so why was the difference so big? Veildu remained silent, because he hadn't recorded a single one either. This meant that the lifeline of the Abraham was still firmly in the other party's hands. Veildu couldn't help but show a bitter expression, but who could he blame? Blame Miss Furs. Miss Furs helped heal the curse that had plagued the Abraham for thousands of years. Even if it was only a temporary solution, at least there was a treatment method. Moreover, Miss Furs was generous enough to let them record it. If they couldn't record it, that was their own problem. What right did they have to blame Miss Furs? If they actually had such thoughts, they wouldn't be worthy of shouting the slogan to make the Abraham great again. This is also good. Dorian saw their low spirits and comforted them. At least my success means that the Abraham can fully take another step forward. As for the treatment method, perhaps not being able to record it is actually a good thing. If the treatment method could only be controlled by the other party, whether they could advance and escape the curse would depend entirely on the other party's mood. While this put the Abraham at the mercy of others, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Because as long as they were always under the control of others, at least it wouldn't arouse the other party's vigilance, nor would it allow other people with ulterior motives to destroy this hard-won opportunity. Others might still have objections, but at least for Dorian, he was already content. Since there was already a glimmer of hope for treating the curse, he no longer craved anything else. Veildu glanced at him and said lightly, "You should put on your pants first." Dorian looked down and his face instantly froze. He had wondered why he felt so cold. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.